Yara Greyjoy stood upon the prow of the Iron Victory with salt spray flecking her face. The deck rolled beneath her boots, an old friend in a surging sea. Every breath smelled of brine and possibility. This was the domain of House Greyjoy. These waters had shaped her, scarred her, and lifted her to defiance. She had seen every face the ocean could wear, gentle as a lover's caress, wrathful as the ancient storms that swallowed entire fleets without mercy. The cold wind that streaked across her cheeks only exhilarated her. She was alive here, at home in the heart of the ocean, more than she could be on any patch of land. They were sailing under a moonless sky. The torches set along the sides of the longship hissed and spat sparks into the gloom, illuminating Yara's crew in flickering gold. Men and women who had pledged themselves to her command readied grappling hooks, crossbows, and nets. She could see the tension in their eyes. The night was laden with a hush that came from more than the lowering of voices. This was the hush of a trap set, a beast about to pounce, the hush of a dreaded possibility no one dared say aloud. She glanced across the roiling waves and spotted, in the near distance, the silhouette of another ship. It flew no banner, it carried no open heraldry. But she knew it was one of her own, a smaller vessel that would relay signals to the rest of the Iron Fleet. As the Iron Victory plowed forward, the silhouettes of more ships emerged, each a black shape against the faint starlight, arranged in a wide funnel formation. Hundreds of Ironborn raiders, men known for their skill at sea, were out there, each one perched on the edge of anticipation for what this night might bring. She recalled, with a ferocity that made her chest tighten, the council she had held hours earlier in the private cabin near the stern of the Iron Victory. The memory of Theon's presence unsettled her. Though she loved him in her own way, her dear brother never truly fit among the Ironborn after his time in Winterfell and the horrors he had suffered under Ramsay Bolton. Yet for better or worse, Theon was hers. She had forgiven him for his past failings, or at least had learned to set them aside for now. But as he had sat across from her, still too thin, a restless tension in his eyes, Yara could tell he was as uncertain as she felt. He had tried to speak softly, tried to speak sense. "Yara, this is madness," Theon had said, no doubt recalling all the times their alliances had been precarious, the many misjudgments they had suffered. "Daenerys Targaryen allowed us to keep our lives when Euron chased us across the narrow sea. We have ships because she allowed us to build them. We have men because she gave us the chance to return to the Iron Islands in peace, and you would do this? You would turn on her? She has dragons, 3 of them, not to mention an army of Unsullied and Dothraki. If you fail to kill her in one stroke, you will burn for it." Yara had stared at him, silently, for many long heartbeats. He spoke of the danger and the cost, but her mind was a raging swirl of determination and a desire for independence that could not be quenched. "She has threatened to reduce the Iron Islands into a vassal state," Yara had replied, remembering too keenly the meeting in Dragonstone, when Daenerys had spoken of the 7 kingdoms uniting under her. Yara might have admired that strength, that unwavering sense of conquest, if it had not threatened to cage her own people. "She says it is for a better world, Theon, but all I see is another foreign ruler determined to bend us to her will." At first, her generosity seemed real. We struck a bargain, yes. She would help us overthrow Euron. We would help her take the Iron Throne. But what then? She would demand we kneel to her, bow to her laws, send our men to fight her wars. The Ironborn do not bow. We have bent too often. Perhaps we needed her once, but we do not now. Theon had flinched, glancing to a corner of the cabin as if a memory lurked there. "Will you risk our entire house for this?" "I will risk everything to ensure the Iron Islands remain free," Yara had said, more firmly than she felt. "That is what the Ironborn do. We do not so. We take what we need, what we can. And if you care to remember, Theon, we do it on our own terms. Now is our moment. Daenerys is traveling with a portion of her fleet, and more importantly, she's been bold enough to bring her dragons with her. She's bound for the Westerlands, or so our spies say, determined to blockade Lannisport. If we capture her on the open sea, if we capture her dragons, then the game will change forever. The Iron Islands will rise to the mightiest seat of power in the realm. Even if we do not take the Iron Throne, we will have the ultimate advantage against any who would challenge us." It was a plan steeped in equal measures of ambition and madness. The notion of capturing dragons, living weapons of unimaginable power, would have made lesser men quake with fear. Even Yara's own captains had grown silent, uncertain if her plan was feasible. But the Ironborn had always thrived on audacity. An impossible haul was all the more tempting, the greatest Reaver's prize. The Iron Islands had lived in the shadow of larger kingdoms for centuries, overshadowed by the might of the Lannisters, the Tyrells, and the Targaryens before them. Yet never had the Greyjoys possessed a weapon like a dragon, much less 3. So the decision was made, for good or ill, and the Iron Fleet fanned out across the sea routes Daenerys was likely to take. Weeks were spent in the planning. False signals, rumors spread of trouble in the Stepstones, possible sightings of Euron Greyjoy's ragged remains of a fleet in another direction, bribes given to a few unscrupulous merchants who would pass on false word about pirate attacks. They needed Daenerys' path to funnel her precisely where Yara wanted her. Into Ironborn waters, into a place where Yara had the advantage. They would lure the mighty Queen of Dragons into a naval ambush. If all went well, Yara would outnumber her and box her ships in. Then came the question of dragons. How did one capture rather than kill them? Yara had listened to the wild tales from Essos of men who tried to chain or net dragons and had ended up in cinders. She remembered the stories from the old Reaver's song about Harrenhal's blackened towers and how Aegon's dragons reduced them to molten stone. Yet, in one old tome pilfered from the remains of Pike's limited library, she found mention of certain devices used by cunning men centuries ago to subdue wild drakes in Sithorios, heavy metal nets linked with barbed hooks, coupled with enormous ballista bolts that carried weighted chains. It was said it took the strength of 100 men to reel in a single captive drake. And if the drake was not subdued swiftly, the men simply burned. But Yara had an advantage those men never did: the sea. If she could drive the dragons to the water's surface and keep them near her ships, perhaps she could douse them with barrels of salt water, hamper their flames with thick sails soaked in brine. It was all speculation. No one truly knew how effective these measures would be. But the possibility was there. And now the night of the ambush had come. Theon was somewhere aboard the Iron Victory's deck, likely reviewing the ballista teams and the men with the nets. Yara let him be. She needed no further arguments to rattle her resolve. No more voices of doubt. She was Yara Greyjoy, daughter of Balon Greyjoy, rightful ruler of the Iron Islands, and she would not cower before the might of a dragon queen. The time of House Greyjoy's subservience was at an end. She lifted her gaze, scanning the horizon. The sky was velvet black, with only a smattering of stars. The sails of her other ships occasionally glimmered when they passed a lantern's glow. She could sense all the watchers perched in crow's nests, their eyes straining for a sign of movement. They had so few hours left to wait. Their spies had reported Daenerys was sailing at speed, ignoring the possibility of an Iron Fleet ambush because she believed Yara still allied with her. That was her advantage: trust. Daenerys would not expect betrayal, at least not yet. Yara frowned, thinking back to their first meeting. Daenerys had been smaller in stature than Yara expected, but she possessed a quiet ferocity in her bearing. Her silver-gold hair might have been a shimmer of sunlight, her pale skin unearthly, but there was no mistaking that presence, that unbending will. They had bantered about independence, about the Iron Islands wanting to rule themselves. Daenerys had agreed if Yara would swear loyalty to her as queen, she would allow the Iron Islands to keep their ways, so long as the old reaving traditions ceased. And Yara had agreed, or pretended to. In her heart, she had hoped for something genuine. Perhaps she was even taken in, for a short time, by the Targaryens' dream of a better world, free from the cruelties of the old wars. But illusions fade quickly at sea. Yara's people, her men, did not want to give up pillaging and reaving, the very soul of the Ironborn. Even if Yara was different from her father, she was still Greyjoy to the bone. That cold truth had settled into her soul. A low whistle came from the nearest ship in the funnel. Yara felt her heart jolt. A signal, sails spotted on the horizon. She closed her eyes for a moment, inhaling the smell of the sea, letting the salt-laden air sharpen her senses. Then she walked back across the deck, barking orders. The watchers lit a lantern, once, then twice in quick succession. The signals would ripple through the formation. Prepare. Daenerys Targaryen was close. Yara's voice rang out, steady. Make ready the chains, check the grapnels. No man or woman leaves their post without my command. She looked over the side, aware that half a dozen other vessels waited behind them, hidden in the swirl of black waves. Another half dozen or more lined the flanks. Her plan was simple and brutal: form a pincer that would drive Daenerys' flagship and her escort into a narrow channel of steel, then unleash ballista fire and barbed nets at the dragons. The tension rose. Crewmen whispered prayers to the drowned god, crossing themselves and spitting salt water from little flasks they carried in their belts. They believed that if the drowned god favored them, the dragon's flames might be quenched. Yara did not pray, but she did not begrudge her crew these small comforts. Everyone had a right to fear the winged beasts. They were rumored to be the size of grown whales, with scales black as night or green as summer meadows or the color of molten gold. She had seen Drogon, the largest of the three, in flight once. The monstrous wings had blotted out the sun. Could they capture such a being? Could they truly contain that fury? The plan was in motion, so it was too late to flinch now. Yara moved to the railing of the quarterdeck, gazing toward the horizon. There, faintly illuminated by the starlight, she saw sails, more than one set, perhaps 4 or 5. At the heart of those sails would be Daenerys Targaryen herself, no doubt on a grand warship with the Targaryen sigil snapping in the wind. Yara's grip tightened around the hilt of her sword. She would need luck, but luck was a fleeting concept at sea. Skill and ferocity mattered more. As Daenerys's fleet approached the funnel, it was plain they had not realized the trap yet. The Iron Fleet ships remained unlit save for the smallest dim lanterns concealed by thick tarps. The sea swallowed all but the most perceptive glimpses. A minute passed like an hour, each breath drawn out until tension thrummed through Yara's limbs. Then a flurry of motion, a shout from one of Daenerys's escorts. They had seen the shape of a hidden Ironborn ship. Now, Yara shouted. All along the funnel, lights blazed to life. Torches, lanterns, braziers, enough to illuminate the jaws of the trap. Ironborn horns boomed across the dark waters, echoing like thunderclaps. Yara's heart hammered. She could see the confusion rocking the enemy ships. They were in disarray, with no time to form a defensive line or rally a retreat. The wind blew in the Iron Fleet's favor. Her longships surged forward, sails taut, crossing the waves in swift arcs. Ballistae took aim from elevated platforms, reloading the giant spears fitted with iron chains. Grappling hooks were readied on the prow, and from Yara's vantage point, she saw the shadow of something vast move across the sky. A dragon soared overhead, as though conjured from a black wind. For a fleeting instant, Yara felt her chest constrict. The beast roared, a savage sound that rattled the timbers of her ship. Its underside was pale, tinted green, and the massive wings bore streaks of silver in the faint starlight. This was Regal, if she recalled, one of Daenerys's children, named for her brother Rhaegar Targaryen. Behind him, 2 other shadows moved, one larger, black as a night without stars, and one smaller, tinted gold. Drogon and Viserion. They descended with terrifying speed, swirling around the Queen's flagship. The sea lit with bursts of orange flame. The lead ballista on one of Yara's ships sent a chain-lashed spear at Drogon, but the beast wheeled aside. The chain whistled past the great wings, almost catching the trailing edge. Sparks exploded into the air as the spear crashed into the hull of Daenerys's warship. It was a near miss. Yara cursed under her breath. She saw a flicker of movement on the deck of that warship. A pale-haired figure, slight but unafraid, clad in black leathers. Daenerys Targaryen. She looked furious, her hair streaming behind her, and in the next moment, Drogon descended to the ship, letting her climb onto his back. The Queen was going to use her dragons as she always did, decisively. "Port ballista, fire!" Yara shouted, gesturing to her crew. A second spear launched from the Iron Victory. It soared upward, the chain trailing like a serpent's tail, aimed for Regal. But the creature beat its wings and rose into the sky, screeching with unnatural fury. The spear snapped past, missing by inches, and plunged into the ocean. Yet another ballista from a neighboring vessel fired, and Yara heard a shriek that sent a shiver down her spine. It struck something Viserion's flank. A roar of pain cracked through the night. The chain pulled taut, and for a second, Yara thought they might drag the smaller dragon down. But in its agony, Viserion writhed midair, spewing a torrent of flame. The Ironborn ship caught fire in an instant, sails bursting into a conflagration. Even from a distance, Yara could see men screaming as the flames devoured them. Chaos erupted. The Iron Fleet pressed its advantage, ramming into Daenerys's ships, grappling them, boarding them. Yara's men fought with savage fury, as they always did. At the same time, the dragons unleashed wave after wave of fire, incinerating rigging and men alike. Thick black smoke rose across the water, forming a haze that glowed orange with reflected flames. Yara shielded her face from the heat. She strained to see Daenerys, who soared overhead on Drogon. The monstrous black beast circled, unleashing bursts of flame at any cluster of Ironborn. Yara heard the timbers of an allied ship crack and split. Men dived into the sea, shrieking in terror. In the midst of that horror, Theon appeared beside her, face streaked with soot and eyes wide. "We can't hold them in the air," he yelled above the roar. "Our best chance is if they land or come low enough for the nets." Yara nodded. It was impossible to bring down the dragons while they had the advantage of flight. Even if the ballistae were well aimed, the dragons were too swift and unpredictable. She needed to force them close to the water. She scanned the chaos, looking for a sign that her second wave of ships was moving into position. Yes, there they were, dark silhouettes emerging from behind Daenerys' flagship. That second wave would block any retreat. The real trick was capturing the dragons, not just scaring them away. If Daenerys chose to flee, she might slip through the lines on her mount, but her fleet would be lost. Then came a stroke of luck or madness. Rhaegal dove toward one of Yara's ships, its jaws opening wide. A torrent of flame poured forth, igniting the deck. But as the deck exploded in flames, that ship's ballista fired at point-blank range. The spear slammed into Rhaegal's flank, hooking through scale and flesh, lodging itself near the joint of a wing. The dragon's roar was ear-splitting. For a moment, it faltered, nearly crashing into the mast. Then it surged back up, carrying the trailing chain with it. The ship's crew leapt to hold the chain to weigh the beast down. "Hold it!" Yara bellowed, not sure if they could even hear her from this distance. But hold it they did, at least for a few seconds. Rhaegal beat its wounded wing frantically, dragging the ship's prow upward. The wooden deck groaned. Water flooded over the stern. Soon the entire vessel was skewed at a precarious angle, men clinging to the chain, trying to keep the dragon from soaring away. But with a final great pull, Rhaegal tore the ballista from the deck, snapping the chain's anchor. The ship lurched upright, nearly capsizing. Rhaegal, bleeding and furious, disappeared into the smoke. Yara ground her teeth. So far, they had inflicted some wounds, but their losses would be great if the dragons remained free. They needed a better strategy. Then she spotted Daenerys herself. Drogon had descended, swirling low above the water to strafe the ships, as if Daenerys wanted to protect her battered vessels from boarding. That meant the Black Dragon was coming within range of the heaviest ballista on Iron Victory's deck. "Ready the main ballista," Yara roared. "Chain net bolts now." Her crew sprang into action, hauling a monstrous weapon into place. It was not merely a single spear, but a cluster of weighted bolts connected by an interlocking net of iron links. The plan was to entangle a dragon's wings just long enough for a second wave of harpoons to anchor it to the hull. Yara silently begged the drowned god for a fraction of mercy. Then, as Drogon swept close enough that Yara could smell the foul stench of sulfur on its breath, the ballista's lever was released. The net tore through the air with a shrill whine. For an instant, Yara saw the net wrap around Drogon's right wing, tangling in the spines. A triumphant howl escaped her lips. The dragon roared, twisting in panic. Daenerys clung to Drogon's back, her eyes wide. But before the second wave of harpoons could be released, Drogon's claws struck the rigging of the Iron Victory's mast, ripping through it. The deck shuddered violently. Yara staggered, nearly thrown off her feet. Men screamed as the mast cracked, toppling partway, tangling the net. The rigging caught fire from the dragon's simmering jaws. Daenerys shouted something that Yara couldn't hear, and Drogon flailed with its entangled wing. The net tore, but not completely. It had anchored itself around several of the ship's crossbeams. The beast's thrashings snapped timbers and splintered wood. All the while, crossbowmen on the Iron Victory loosed bolts at Drogon's underbelly, though most deflected off thick scales. Yara recovered her footing, sword in hand. Theon was beside her again, though how he'd managed to stay upright, she could only guess. The deck was in chaos. Flames at the prow, rigging collapsed, men running in all directions. Above them, Drogon's serpentine neck reared back, jaws opening. Yara watched the glow of fire gather in the dragon's throat and realized with dawning horror that Drogon would unleash. His flames at point-blank range. No net, no illusions. She was about to be charred alive. A wave hit the Iron Victory's side, sending up a spray of salt water. It spattered Drogon's face. The dragon recoiled momentarily, fire sputtering from its maw. Yara seized that heartbeat of opportunity. "Bring up the doused sails," she ordered, remembering the heavy canvas sails her men had soaked in barrels of saltwater days ago. Several crew members scrambled to the foredeck and unrolled the wet sails, heaving them forward to drape Drogon's head and neck. The sails smothered the dragon's face, and Drogon roared in blind fury, thrashing around. With the great beast distracted, Theon and half a dozen men rushed to fire a second harpoon from a smaller ballista near the stern. It lanced through the net already around Drogon's wing, pinning it to a chunk of shattered mast. The dragon bellowed in pain, half bound by the net, face partly covered by drenched sails that steamed from the heat of its flame. Daenerys had no choice but to dismount or be crushed under Drogon's shifting weight. Yara saw the Targaryen queen leap from the saddle onto the deck, moving with surprising agility, though she landed heavily, rolling to her side before coming up with a dagger in hand. Yara's men converged at once, brandishing axes, swords, and spears. Daenerys looked around, wide-eyed yet unbroken. She was alone in the midst of Ironborn warriors, her dearest children in the sky, one pinned to the ship and two circling overhead. Smoke and flame wreathed the entire sea around them. A hush of awe fell over the deck, if only for a moment, as men realized who stood before them. The Dragon Queen. Even battered, with her braided hair half undone, she looked formidable. A hush, then immediate chaos. Daenerys struck swiftly at the first Ironborn who approached, slashing his throat with a savage twist. The man collapsed, blood painting the soaked planks. Another came at her with a longsword. She ducked, agile, catching him across the leg with her dagger. But there were too many. She might have been fierce, might have had the will of a conqueror, yet no mortal could face a dozen armed Ironborn at once. Yara strode forward, sword in hand, brushing aside two of her men. "Enough," she bellowed. Her voice carried over the tumult. "Stand aside. She is mine." Daenerys turned, chest heaving, eyes aflame. She recognized Yara, confusion and betrayal flickering across her features. "Yara Greyjoy," she said, voice ragged. "What have you done?" "I've done what the Ironborn do," Yara replied evenly. She raised her sword. We pay the iron price. You thought me a subject, but we kneel to no queen." Daenerys' nostrils flared. She lunged, dagger flashing. Yara parried, metal clashing in a shriek that seemed to echo across the deck. Sparks flew, the reflection of flame dancing across Daenerys' determined face. For a moment, Yara felt a pang of respect. This was no pampered princess. This was a woman who had fought for everything she possessed. They traded a series of blows, Daenerys' dagger moving with surprising speed, Yara's sword heavier but with greater reach. The queen aimed for an opening in Yara's guard, but Yara sidestepped, smashing Daenerys' forearm with her sword's pommel. Daenerys hissed, her dagger clattering to the deck. Another blow, a backhanded slash with the hilt, caught Daenerys across the temple. She crumpled to her knees, blood trickling from her brow. Yara pointed her sword at the queen's throat. Their gazes locked. In the background, Drogon still thrashed, pinned and struggling. Ballista operators and men with nets worked furiously to restrain the beast, hooking more chains around its limbs. Rhaegal and Viserion circled overhead, but the thick smoke and the massive ballista fire forced them to keep their distance or risk the same fate. "It's over," Yara said softly. Her voice trembled with adrenaline, a mixture of triumph and an uneasy awe. She had done the impossible. She had captured Daenerys Targaryen on the open sea, pinned Drogon, and forced the other dragons to wheel overhead in helpless fury. If only for this moment, the queen was at her mercy. Daenerys looked up, eyes blazing even through the haze of pain. "It's never over," she spat, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Yara said nothing more. She seized Daenerys' wrists, forcing them behind her back, and signaled her men to bind her. She wanted to speak words of finality, of justification, but all she could manage was to swallow the sudden dryness in her throat. She had expected triumph to feel sweeter, but in truth it felt precarious. The deck was an inferno of scattered flames, fallen rigging, the pinned black dragon convulsing in agony. Her fleet had been battered by the other two dragons' fury. But victory was within sight. Daenerys Targaryen was now her prisoner. She looked skyward. Viserion and Rhaegal roared impotently, swerving around the Iron Victory. Crossbows were aimed at them, though it was unclear if the dragons would risk diving in with their mother on board. If they did, they might kill her in the attempt. Yara clenched her jaw, steeling herself. "Hurl the anchors and raise the sails," she commanded. "We move north. We make for Pike. We have what we came for." Men scrambled to obey. Theon, battered and grim-faced, stared at Daenerys' bound form. He looked as though he might be sick. "Yara," he said, you actually took her prisoner." She gave him a curt nod. "Secure her below decks. Gag her if you must. We can't have her giving any commands to her dragons." Theon said nothing. He merely moved to do as she asked, hauling Daenerys to her feet along with 2 other Ironborn. The queen stumbled, defiance simmering in her gaze, but she could not resist 3 pairs of hands. A hush settled among the crew. Even those who had never seen a dragon before, who had never touched the edges of such power, knew what had just transpired was unprecedented. Chains groaned as they tightened around Drogon's limbs, hooking him to the battered mast and the rigging. A dozen or more men stabbed at him with spears, not to kill but to keep him from unleashing more flame. The sails were still soaked enough to smother most of the dragon's attempts at fire, but Yara sensed they would not remain wet forever. She needed to get to Pike quickly or else find a more secure means of containing the beast. Already she saw small flames licking at the edges of the sails. Drogon's roars rumbled through the hull, shaking her very bones. She walked to the prow, surveying the damage. The sea was littered with wreckage, burning ships, floating bodies. Some were Daenerys' men, some her own. Her funnel formation had partially worked, allowing her to board or destroy most of the Targaryen warships. But the dragons had decimated several of her vessels, and only a fraction of her ships seemed intact enough for a long voyage. The cost had been high, and it was not over. Rhaegal and Viserion lingered overhead, howling their mourning and rage. They flapped closer every few moments, only to be driven off by arrows or the swirling smoke. Yara felt something tighten in her chest as she realized she now must do what no one had done in centuries, transport a living dragon back to the Iron Islands. Perhaps more than one if she could contrive it. Gods, it sounded absurd just thinking it. She swallowed, forcing herself to focus on the next immediate step. Survival. Signal the fleet, she ordered. We regroup. Any ship too damaged to sail, scuttle it. Transfer their crews to our remaining vessels. We make our heading for Pike with the tide. And kill anyone from Daenerys' fleet who won't swear loyalty to us. A burly captain stepped forward, face smudged with soot. And the other dragons, Captain? He asked. No one called her captain except the old reavers who had sailed under her father. What if they follow us? Yara's gaze shifted to the swirling shapes overhead. They will, she said, a note of grim acceptance in her voice. They won't abandon their mother or their sibling. And that means... She exhaled. It means we sail and we keep enough men on the deck's ballista to fend them off. Perhaps we can bring them down in the crossing. Or perhaps they will keep their distance if they value their own lives. Either way, we can't stay here. The captain nodded and barked orders to his men. Over the next hour, the Iron Fleet reassembled. Dozens of men were dead, some burned beyond recognition. Several ships had been lost, turned to ash, or gutted from dragon fire. Yet a surprisingly large contingent remained, battered but determined. They carried their precious cargo. Daenerys Targaryen bound below decks on the Iron Victory and Drogon chained to the scorched remains of the deck, netted and kept sedated, if only tenuously, by a combination of heavy sails, barbed chains, and constant vigilance with spears. Rhaegal and Viserion followed at a distance, their roars carrying across the wind. But they dared not land, at least not yet. As the battered fleet sailed toward Pike, Yara felt an odd mixture of victory and unease. She stood at the helm, her hands calloused around the wheel. The dark silhouette of the Iron Islands lay far across the water, a journey of several days if the wind was fair. Could they endure multiple days of the dragons trailing them? Could they keep Drogon bound for that long without him breaking free? Would Daenerys find a way to escape or sabotage them from below decks? Yara tried to calm her racing mind by focusing on the immediate details of navigation, the shape of the water, the direction of the wind. But her imagination churned with the possibilities. Pike had never hosted a dragon before. Its towers and causeways were precarious, perched on black stone worn by centuries of crashing waves. Could she confine the dragon in the labyrinth of those towers? Or would it tear the castle apart from within? She had half a mind to sail to some remote islet, a place with deep caverns that might serve as a makeshift prison. But Pike was her seat of power, and she needed that seat to maintain her authority over the other captains. Eventually, she retired to her cabin, the place with the least damage, though the floor was covered in debris from the shattered mast and dislodged furniture. Candlelight flickered across the walls. She tossed aside bits of splintered wood and tried to compose herself. A single servant brought a basin of water, and Yara washed the blood and grime from her face. She studied her reflection in the water's surface, barely recognizing the woman who stared back, eyes shadowed, skin painted with soot, hair caked with salt and dried sweat. She felt older than her years, but victory had come at a price. She sat on a low stool, letting exhaustion seep into her muscles. A few minutes later, Theon came in, face pale, eyes flickering with some private anguish. He shut the door quietly behind him. They looked at each other for a moment, neither speaking. Then Theon sighed, placing his hands on the back of a chair. We've lost so many, he murmured. Jal's ship is gone. Torwald the Reaver drowned. Kelna's men, half her crew burned. Yara nodded, a part of her feeling each name like a bruise. We knew it would be costly. Yes, Theon agreed, his gaze haunted, but was it worth it? She pressed her lips tight. I don't know, she admitted. But it's done. We have her. The Dragon Queen is ours. Theon closed his eyes. I've spoken to her. Well, tried to. She refused to say anything. She just stared at me as though I was nothing. As though she felt only hatred and pity for me. She said no words, but her eyes spoke plenty. She'll have to speak eventually, Yara said. If she wants to live. I mean to use her to bargain, maybe not with Cersei, but with the lords of Westeros. Let them see that the Iron Islands are not to be trifled with. If they want Daenerys Targaryen alive, they will have to treat with me. You think she'll just bend to that? Theon asked. Yara exhaled. She will if she wants to save her people, to save her dragons from more harm. She hesitated. But perhaps she won't. She might choose to let them burn with her. She's that type, I think, fiercely loyal to her cause, unwavering. Theon shook his head, glancing around. This is bigger than anything we've done, he murmured, a tremor in his voice. Every house in Westeros will hear of this. They'll either fear us or unite against us. We've done something that hasn't been done since Robert's rebellion captured a Targaryen. Yara looked away, gazing at the guttering candle flame. She had known all this, but hearing it spelled out made it more real. And so be it, she said. If we can hold the dragons, no force can stand against us without thinking twice. They left it at that. Theon drifted out, saying he needed to check on the ballista crews. Yara sat alone, letting the silence stretch, letting the candle burn low. Her mind flickered with the image of Daenerys' face, the shock, the betrayal. Perhaps, in another world, they might have been true allies, even friends. But the sea was a cruel mistress, and Yara's life had been carved by cruelty. This was the path she had chosen. The next days were a nightmare of attrition. Rhaegal and Viserion took turns harrying the fleet from the air, swooping in to unleash quick bursts of flame whenever a ship lagged or strayed from the formation. In response, the Ironborn launched spears and nets, occasionally scoring a hit but never enough to bring the dragons down. The sea was littered with more wreckage as the crossing continued. Yara's own ship, the Iron Victory, was spared the brunt of the attacks, almost as if the dragons hesitated to harm Drogon or risk injuring Daenerys. But Yara could not be certain they would remain so hesitant. Below decks, in the stifling gloom of a makeshift cell, Daenerys refused to eat for the first 2 days. She refused to speak, refused to look at Yara. She sat with her back against the hull, staring at a small patch of light from a porthole above the waterline. She did not scream or rage, only a silent bitterness. Yara found it unnerving. Tell me what you're thinking, she said one morning, trying to break the silence. Daenerys merely fixed her with an icy stare. By the 3rd day, the queen's resolve cracked enough that she accepted water, though little else. On the 4th day, Yara entered the cell to find Daenerys already standing, leaning against the wall, arms still bound in front of her. Her eyes were dark with sleeplessness. You cannot hold a dragon forever, the queen said, her voice raspy. It was the first sentence she had spoken to Yara since being captured. Yara gave a short laugh. Yet I've held one for days. Daenerys' lips curled in a faint, mirthless smile. Days are nothing to a dragon's life. His fury is eternal. Drogon will free himself, and when he does, he will burn you and your people to ashes. Then perhaps I'll slit his throat before that, Yara replied. You think I can't kill him if I must? Daenerys didn't flinch. If you kill him, you lose your only advantage, she said. That's why you haven't done it yet. You want to rule the seas with a dragon under your command, but no dragon can be tamed. Yara gritted her teeth. Times change, Targaryen. Your ancestors tamed dragons, didn't they? The same can be done now. Daenerys' gaze bored into hers. My ancestors did it with blood and magic. Do you fancy yourself a sorcerer? Westeros is full of rumors and relics, Yara returned. Perhaps I'll find what I need. In truth, she had no such knowledge, but she refused to show any uncertainty. In the meantime, we'll reach Pike soon enough. There, I'll find a more permanent place to keep Drogon. You will regret it, Daenerys said, her voice low and laden with a calm, terrifying certainty. The Iron Throne, the great houses, none of them can save you from Dragon's wrath. Release me, and perhaps I will spare you. Continue this folly, and I will Yara slammed her hand against the hull, cutting her off. You are in no position to threaten me, Daenerys Targaryen. And I do not need your mercy. The time for deals is long past. She turned to leave, calling back over her shoulder. I'll send more water soon if you're wise enough to accept it. She left, her heart pounding. Daenerys's calm felt more dangerous than any scream. It was the quiet certainty of a storm building on the horizon. But Yara forced it from her mind. She was no stranger to storms at sea. She would weather this one as she had all the others. Finally, Pike's jagged towers came into view, thrusting out of the churning waters like broken teeth. The fortress itself was perched on separate rocky stacks connected by swaying rope bridges. The tide was vicious around the base, crashing and foaming. From a distance, one might think it impregnable, but Yara knew its weaknesses. Long sections of the castle had fallen into ruin, courtesy of the centuries of salt-lashed winds. Yet for her purposes, it might serve well enough. The battered iron fleet assembled in Lord Sport's harbor. Smoke still rose from a half-burned ship and the smell of scorched flesh lingered in the wind. By some twist of fortune, Drogon still lived, though bleeding from multiple wounds, pinned under a heavier net now reinforced with iron weights. The noise the beast made as they tried to drag it onto the stony beach was horrifying, a deep, resonant moan that made even the bravest reavers blanch. Rhaegal and Viserion circled overhead, letting out shrill keening wails. They flapped lower as if they meant to land, but the Ironborn readied their ballista and the dragons did not dare a frontal assault. On Pike's highest tower, the banners of House Greyjoy fluttered in the sea breeze, the golden kraken on its black field, an omen of the new power rising. Word spread among the Ironborn. Yara Greyjoy had captured the Dragon Queen. Yara Greyjoy had chained one of the dragons on the beaches of Pike. A swirl of fear and awe swept through the isles, stirring the warriors' hearts. Some whispered that Yara might proclaim herself Queen of the Seas. Others said the drowned god must have guided her hand to accomplish such a feat. Yara said nothing. She only oversaw the final securing of Drogon, instructing a select group of men to drag the enormous beast into a half-collapsed courtyard near the base of Pike, where iron chains and thick walls might keep it contained for a time. The journey from the beach to the castle was a nightmare. Drogon's protests shook the very stones and the old pathways cracked under his weight. More than one reaver was roasted or crushed when the dragon thrashed. But at length they succeeded in hauling him inside the open courtyard, ringed by partially crumbled walls. Yara had barricades of sharpened stakes erected and covered the area with soaked sailcloth to hamper the dragon's flames. It was no elegant stable, but for now it was a prison. Daenerys was brought along in shackles, forced to witness her child's imprisonment. She walked with her head high despite her wrists being bound. Theon escorted her, flanked by a dozen Ironborn guards. They took her to a small tower room. Not a dungeon, but no comfort either. Stone walls, a single barred window overlooking the courtyard where Drogon lay roaring, a narrow cot, and a wooden chamber pot. If anything, the vantage was cruel. From that window, Daenerys would see Drogon's torment day and night. Yara followed them inside. She watched as Theon locked the door, then nodded to the guards to wait outside. Alone with Daenerys in the cramped space, Yara tried to quell the strange pang in her heart. She remembered the first time she had brought Theon back to Pike so many years ago. He had hated it, hated the gloom and the smell of dead fish, the cold, the damp. Now she was forcing another royal captive to endure it. Daenerys flexed her shoulders, arms still chained before her. "Do you plan to keep me here forever?" she asked, voice raw. Yara regarded her for a moment, then shrugged. "Until you're no longer useful, or until you see sense and swear loyalty to me, whichever comes first." Daenerys gave a short, harsh laugh. "Swear loyalty to you? You truly believe you can rule the seas and the dragons?" "I can rule the seas," Yara said quietly. "And if I cannot rule the dragons, I can at least keep them caged. That is enough." Daenerys's face contorted with a mix of grief and rage. "They will never remain caged," she whispered. "No matter how many chains you bring, no matter how many men you sacrifice." She stared out the window, eyes tearing up at the sight of Drogon pinned under nets and chains. The dragon's labored breathing echoed off the stone walls, mingled with the hiss of the sea winds. Yara's gaze softened, if only for a moment. A flash of sympathy twisted in her gut. She understood what it was to care deeply for something, her brother, her ships, her people. But that sympathy did not overshadow her resolve. "You forced my hand," she said. "You wanted to subjugate the Iron Islands under your grand vision for a united Westeros. We've known nothing but subjugation for centuries. Enough. The Ironborn deserve independence." Daenerys turned on her. "I offered you independence. I offered you a chance to break the cycle, so long as you would let the old ways die, the reaving, the pillaging. You refused. You choose to remain mired in blood and iron, so I would have ended that if you would not give it up. That is why you betrayed me. Call it betrayal if you will, Yara replied. I call it survival. We are not farmers or merchants. We are reavers born of salt and rock. If the old ways die, so do we. She gestured at the window. Take a good look, Targaryen. This is the only reason you are still alive. I need you, or rather, I need your name and your dragons. They are worth more than your death. Daenerys pursed her lips, saying nothing. She looked ready to spit at Yara, but instead, she turned and sank onto the cot, rubbing at her temples. The day's events had taken their toll, and she could no longer conceal her exhaustion. Yara turned to leave, pausing at the threshold. If you change your mind, if you wish to discuss terms, I am open to hearing them. Until then, you remain my prisoner. She went out, the heavy door slamming behind her. Outside, Theon stood waiting. Yara steeled herself for an argument, but he only gave her a weary nod. We've done it, he said, as though trying to convince himself it was real. She nodded. We have. Now comes the hard part. She could already hear the worried muttering of her captains in the hallway, men who saw the wounded Drogon in the courtyard and wondered how long those makeshift chains would hold. Men who stared at the circling silhouettes of Rhaegal and Viserion in the sky with dread. Yara moved among them, setting her shoulders back. She was their leader, and she had to appear confident, even if inside the enormity of her gamble gnawed at her. For the next few weeks, Pike existed in a strange stalemate. Yara reinforced the courtyard, layering more chains and building improvised walls of thick oak beams to keep Drogon penned. She posted rotating crews of Ironborn to monitor the dragon, armed with long pikes and crossbows. They soaked everything in salt water, hoping to reduce the risk of fire spreading. They catapulted barrels of seawater whenever Drogon tried to unleash his flames, quenching his attempts. Eventually, the great beast seemed too weak to fight as fiercely. Wounds from the battle still festered, and though Yara ordered the men to throw raw fish and goat carcasses into the courtyard, Drogon ate very little. He spent much of his time in pained, sullen slumber, occasionally rattling the chains. The sight of such a magnificent creature subdued was both thrilling and unnerving. Rhaegal and Viserion hovered nearby, perching on crags of rock beyond the castle's range. Sometimes they soared overhead, unleashing a cacophony of roars, but they did not dare attempt a rescue. Whenever they drew too close, the ballista crews fired warning shots. Once they tried a coordinated assault at dawn, diving together in a flurry of wings. They succeeded in torching a portion of Pike's outer towers, forcing the Ironborn to scramble. But ultimately, the structure of the fortress held and the dragons retreated again when a barrage of harpoons threatened them. The entire castle was on constant guard, day and night, the tension as thick as tar. Daenerys refused any negotiation. She remained in her cramped tower room, weakening from her refusal to eat. Theon grew uneasy, urging Yara to at least allow her better food or a chance to walk in the courtyard. Yara refused. I can't let her near Drogon, she said. She'll try to free him. But she's withering, Theon said one morning, watching her with anxious eyes. If you let her die, you lose your leverage. And it's not right. Yara sighed. A part of her remembered that she was once drawn to Daenerys' strength and determination. They had shared a moment of mutual attraction, or so Yara believed, back in Dragonstone. But that was before she realized how fiercely Daenerys would demand the Ironborn bend the knee. You're right, she said at length. We keep her alive for now. Send a few of the thralls with decent food. Let her walk under guard if she'll do so unchained, but she is not to leave that tower unless I say so. And she cannot leave the keep. Understood. Theon nodded. Yes, I'll arrange it. And so Daenerys was given slightly more freedom, enough to walk a few steps along a corridor, to get a breath of sea air from a higher balcony, though never near her dragon. The queen remained silent most days, observing everything with those fierce violet eyes. She accepted a bit of food. She slept. She never once begged. In that grim standoff, time passed. Meanwhile, Yara consolidated her grip on the Iron Islands. She called the lords and captains to Pike, announcing that she had captured the Dragon Queen and one of her beasts. Most were astonished, a few terrified. A handful suggested turning Daenerys over to Cersei Lannister for a reward, but Yara refused. This was not about gold or pleasing the Lannisters. This was about forging a new power. House Greyjoy would no longer dance on the strings of any king or queen. She was the queen now, Queen of Salt and Rock, as her father had once declared himself, but this time with a dragon at her command, or so she wanted them to believe. In truth, controlling Drogon was not so simple. The beast languished, refusing to yield to any attempts at training. Yara had no Dragonlord's whip, no Valyrian blood, no mystical bond. All she had was brute force, nets and chains, and the cruel discipline of men prodding the creature. The results were meager. They could not ride Drogon. They could scarcely coax him to stand without snapping at them. On a few occasions, he erupted in a burst of defiance, killing or maiming those foolhardy enough to get too close. More fish and mutton were tossed in to sate him, but Yara did not know how to break him. Perhaps it was impossible. And yet, the mere fact that she possessed a dragon's body within her walls, a living engine of fire, sent shockwaves through Westeros. Ravens arrived daily, from lords near and far. Some threatened, some begged. Rumors spread that Jon Snow, the king in the north, was marshaling forces to liberate Daenerys, or that he was forging an alliance with the Vale. The Lannisters, reeling from internal turmoil, could not send a large fleet, but they might dispatch mercenaries in time. The sands of Dorne were silent, but that did not mean they would remain so forever. War clouds gathered on the horizon, thick with thunder. Yara only tightened her hold, refusing to release the queen. She believed that in time, Daenerys would realize the futility of her position and offer terms. Perhaps she would cede the Iron Islands' permanent independence, or even let Yara keep one dragon in exchange for her life. Yara told herself this was the path to forging a new era for her people, an era in which the Ironborn commanded the seas without fear. One gray morning, Yara ventured into Daenerys' tower to speak with her personally. She had not done so for some time, letting Theon or the guards handle the day-to-day matters. She found the queen standing by the narrow window, looking out at the courtyard below. Rain lashed the stones and sheets, turning the air clammy and cold. Even so, Daenerys wore only a thin gown of dark cloth. She seemed immune to the chill. "You have a visitor," Yara said. "Tyrion Lannister, the imp. He came by ship last night under a flag of truce. He requests an audience with you." Daenerys turned slowly as if the effort pained her. Her cheeks were hollow, her eyes shadowed with grief. "Tyrion is here?" she asked, a spark of interest flickering across her face. "Where's he?" "In the main hall, waiting for my permission to speak with you," Yara replied. "I told him I was inclined to refuse. After all, I don't need him conspiring with you." Daenerys' jaw tensed. "He is my hand," she said, a note of steel in her weary voice. "He will want to negotiate for my release." "Perhaps." Yara stepped closer, her boots echoing on the cold stone. "What do you propose? That I let him speak with you, and in return, what? You promise not to unleash your dragons on my keep." She laughed softly. "You have no leverage. You think that because you have a dragon in chains?" Daenerys demanded, voice trembling. "You think the others will not tear your castle stone by stone to free me, or that my allies will not sail from Essos? I have friends across the sea, more than you can imagine. This ends one way, my freedom." Yara smirked at her bravado, though a hint of anxiety flickered inside. Daenerys might be right, but Yara had come too far to turn back now. She pressed her advantage. "If you truly have so many allies, why have none come yet? It has been weeks. Perhaps you overestimate their devotion." Daenerys' eyes burned. "Free me, Yara. Let me take my dragons and depart. Do that, and I will not seek revenge. I will let the Iron Islands go their own way." That offer from Daenerys' lips was what Yara had dreamed of. But she did not trust the queen to honor such a promise, not after being held captive, after losing so many men and so much blood. She shook her head. "I'm not a fool. You would come back with your armies, and my people would be drowned in dragon fire." Daenerys opened her mouth to protest, but she had no quick retort. Her eyes flickered with frustration. Instead, she said, "Let me see Tyrion, at least. Let me speak with him. If you truly believe you hold all the power, what harm can it do?" Yara paused, considering. Perhaps there was some benefit in hearing the dwarf's proposals. Tyrion Lannister was cunning, but if Yara kept him under guard, maybe she could glean information about the other lords' plans. "Very well," she said at length, "on my terms. My guards will be present." A short while later, Daenerys was escorted down a winding corridor into Pike's damp great hall, a cavernous space with rough-hewn stone pillars and a throng of Ironborn warriors milling about. Trophies from old reavings hung on the walls, battered shields, rusted swords. The smell of fish oil lamps was thick in the air. Tyrion Lannister stood near the far wall, dressed in a hooded cloak, his beard trimmed but streaked with gray at the edges. He looked up as Daenerys entered, relief washing over his features. "Your Grace," he said softly, bowing his head. He tried to move forward, but two Ironborn guards blocked his path with crossed spears. Daenerys nodded, blinking at the light. She had grown pale from her days in the tower, but her presence, even in captivity, commanded attention. Yara stood to one side, arms crossed, flanked by Theon and several reavers. "Speak quickly, imp," she said. "I have little time for pleas." Tyrion gave her a wry glance, then addressed Daenerys. "I came to see you freed, Your Grace. The realm is in turmoil. Cersei's hold on King's Landing is fraying. Euron Greyjoy is rumored to be forming alliances with Sales in the Stepstones, and the North has its own troubles. Your continued absence invites chaos. Is that your way of saying no one is coming for her?" Yara asked, arching a brow. "All too busy with their own problems?" Tyrion's jaw tightened. "I have no illusions that rescuing the Queen from Pike is a simple matter. But armies can be raised, alliances forged. In the end, the entire might of Westeros could be turned against the Iron Islands if you refuse to release her." Yara shrugged. "Let them try. I still hold the greatest weapon." "Do you?" Tyrion asked pointedly. "Or is it the greatest liability? How many resources are you expending to keep Drogon chained day and night while the other two dragons circle above? You're bleeding men and gold just to stand still. Do you think you can do that forever?" Meanwhile, the realm's discontent grows. A coalition of lords will eventually come, if not for Daenerys, then to kill the dragons once and for all. "And what do you gain, House Greyjoy, from that?" Yara narrowed her eyes. "We gain the end of Targaryen hegemony. The Iron Islands remain free." Tyrion's gaze slid to Daenerys, then back to Yara. "Let us propose a different solution. Release the Queen. In exchange, she grants the Iron Islands independence, formally recognized by royal decree. You will be free to raid or not raid as you please, though I doubt your neighbors would stand for it unless the Queen enforces certain limits. But that can be negotiated. In short, we end this without further bloodshed." Yara looked at Daenerys, who was silent, her eyes fixed on Yara's face. "Is that your offer?" Yara asked. "Your queen gave me no such promise in the tower, only vague talk of not seeking revenge." Daenerys raised her chin. "I am willing to consider formal independence for the Iron Islands. I would not return here in wrath, provided you allow me to depart with my dragons unharmed." Her tone was careful but resolute. "I cannot promise that others will not seek to punish you for your part in this war, but I will not lead my armies against you." Yara's mind whirled. This was almost exactly what she had wanted in the beginning, true independence for the Iron Islands. Yet doubt nodded her. Could she trust Daenerys to uphold any agreement made under duress? The Targaryen queen might honor her word out of principle, or she might not. There was no certain way to ensure she would keep the promise once she had her dragons free. "And the dragon?" Yara asked. "What guarantee do I have that Drogon doesn't rise tomorrow to torch my castle?" Tyrion spoke carefully. "We would depart immediately with no harm to Pike or the Ironborn. Once we are at sea, the matter of revenge, well, I cannot lie to you and say your actions will be forgotten. But Daenerys Targaryen is not her father. She does not believe in wanton slaughter." "That is a flimsy guarantee," Yara retorted, gaze flicking to Daenerys. "I recall you feeding an awful lot of men to dragons in the past." Daenerys looked pained. "I did what was necessary to free slaves and end tyranny," she said. "This is different." Yara let the silence stretch, letting them wonder. A part of her wanted to accept. Another part refused to yield, believing that an enemy forced to parley from a cage was not truly bound by any vow. She remembered how quickly alliances could sour. She remembered her father's rebellions, how the Iron Islands had been crushed by the mainland powers. Now she had the upper hand. Did she truly want to surrender it for a promise? She turned to Theon. He had remained quiet, as if paralyzed by the conversation. Yara considered him, searching his face for some clue. He had always urged caution, but also compassion. Now she saw in his eyes a hint of desperate hope that she would end this madness, free Daenerys, and avert a cataclysmic war. Tyrion spread his hands. "If you reject this, if you continue to hold the Queen and her dragon, you will provoke every major house into a united front. They may not agree on much, but none wants a rogue warlord controlling a dragon. It's only a matter of time before the combined fleets outnumber yours 100 to 1. Your illusions of a new empire at sea will end in blood." Yara's lip curled. She knew he was likely right, but pride warred with pragmatism in her heart. She stared at Daenerys, who faced her calmly. This woman possessed a terrifying resolve, just as Yara did. Could there be any trust between them now? At last, Yara drew in a breath. A concession, she said. If I free you, if I let you take Drogon, you will swear a formal treaty before the lords of Westeros, guaranteeing the Iron Islands' absolute independence. No taxes, no kneeling, no retribution for our raids. Daenerys' mouth tightened. I will not condone your raids on innocent people, she said. That is tyranny. Yara's temper flared. Our raids are our livelihood, Targaryen. Then you ask me to sign the freedom of the Iron Islands to pillage the coasts? Daenerys retorted. What do you think the mainland lords will say to that? They will never accept it. War will continue. Tyrion raised his hands. Perhaps a compromise. The Ironborn can fish and trade, sail wherever they please. They can defend themselves, keep their traditions. But large-scale raids against the mainland would be prohibited by the Crown's decree. If that is not acceptable, I fear we have no peace. Yara glanced away, jaw clenched. Theon stared at her, silently pleading for sense. In a rush of frustration, she realized that if she insisted on raiding, there would be no peace. The entire realm would hunt her down. Perhaps the time of the old ways truly was ending. Or perhaps it had ended long ago and she was only now admitting it. So be it, Yara said in a clipped tone. No further raids, only small reavings in unsettled lands, nothing that directly provokes the mainland. We keep our ships, our swords, and we vow no further aggression unless provoked. You will sign a decree that states the Iron Islands are free and independent, that no man will claim lordship over them. Daenerys hesitated. A shadow of regret crossed her face. Then she nodded. If it spares more bloodshed, I will sign such a decree. Though I cannot speak for every house's acceptance, I will enforce it so long as I rule. Yara considered that. Then we have an agreement, Targaryen. But understand, if you break it, if you ever come for my islands again, I will kill you. A flicker of old fire returned to Daenerys' eyes. If you break it, if you raid my people, I will burn Pike to the ground. For a long moment, they stared at each other, two women with salt and fire in their veins, each refusing to bend in spirit. Then Yara inclined her head. Fine. Tyrion let out a breath he had been holding. Thank the gods. Let us finalize the details. And so began the slow unraveling of Yara's dream of a naval empire. In exchange for the Queen's life and the safe release of Drogon, the Iron Islands would become independent, but under the condition that their old raiding ways were ended. It was not the absolute victory Yara had envisioned, but perhaps it was the best they could do. Ironically, in capturing Daenerys Targaryen's dragons, she had forced a peace that would grant her people freedom, albeit tempered by the world's watchful eye. Within a day, Tyrion drafted the formal treatises, and Daenerys, under strict guard, was escorted to the courtyard to see Drogon freed. Yara's men winced at the thought of letting the beast loose, but Yara gave the command with a heavy heart. Great chains were unlocked, the net slowly lifted away. Drogon stirred, lifting his battered wings. He snarled as the last of the barbed links were removed, and for a moment, the Ironborn braced for an inferno. But Daenerys stepped forward, voice trembling with emotion as she spoke to her dragon in Valyrian. Drogon's angry, wounded eyes fixed on her, and his posture softened, if only slightly. In a slow, painful motion, the black dragon rose to his feet, letting out a pained hiss. His siblings swooped overhead, screeching in welcome. Daenerys climbed onto Drogon's back, an action so natural and full of trust that Yara felt a pang of something like awe. She truly was the mother of dragons, forging a bond no chain could sever. Tyrion scrambled aboard as well, looking rather less confident. Then, with a labored stretch of its wings, Drogon took flight. Rhaegal and Viserion joined their brother, and the three dragons soared away from Pike, thunderous wing beats echoing. The watchers on the battlements stood silent, mesmerized, or terrified. Yara waited for the roar of vengeance, for flames to pour down upon them. Instead, the dragons flew out over the open sea, heading eastward until they were only distant specks against the horizon. Her breath left her in a rush. It was done. Daenerys Targaryen was gone, free to rally her armies or uphold her promise, free to claim her own destiny once again. In the days that followed, Yara felt a strange emptiness. The castle courtyards were quiet without the chained roars. The battered remains of the Iron Fleet returned to the tasks of daily life, repairs, fishing, forging new iron for weapons. People spoke in hushed tones, uncertain if war would descend upon them or if a new era of peace had begun. Ravens flew from Pike to the mainland, bearing the newly signed treaties. The realm waited with bated breath to see if Daenerys Targaryen would honor her word. Then, one late afternoon, a raven arrived from Dragonstone. It bore the Queen's seal. In it, Daenerys declared that she had indeed recognized the independence of the Iron Islands under Yara Greyjoy's rule, and that she would command her allies not to invade those lands so long as the agreement was upheld. The letter was concise, formal, free of bitterness. Yet there was one sentence that made Yara's hand tremble as she read it aloud to Theon. "I keep the memory of your betrayal, and though I set it aside for the sake of peace, I do not forget." The threat was clear enough. If Yara ever strayed from the bounds of the agreement, if she ever tried again to seize power through treachery, the dragons would come. If she adhered to the terms, perhaps the Iron Islands would be left to sail free. It was a peace forged in tension, but a peace nonetheless. Standing on Pike's walls, gazing out at the gray sea, Yara felt no joy. She had risked everything, her men, her home, her very life, for the dream of capturing Daenerys' dragons. And for a few weeks, she had achieved the impossible. She had chained a dragon in Pike's courtyard, forced the mother of dragons to her knees. Yet in the end, the cost was so high, the reward so compromised, that she felt only weariness. Perhaps it was the best outcome for her people, true independence, as close to it as they would ever get. And perhaps it was the only outcome that would stave off an endless war. Still, at times, she recalled the scene on the deck of the Iron Victory when Drogon had been netted and Daenerys had stared at her with fury and betrayal. A part of Yara wondered if she had lost something in that moment, something of her own soul, her sense of honor or kinship. The realm called it cunning, they called it bold. But Yara knew she had crossed a line that day, and such lines were never fully forgotten. Days bled into weeks, weeks into months. The Iron Islands persisted, free from Targaryen rule, though always looking over their shoulder for the shape of a dragon in the sky. Yara Greyjoy presided over her captains as the undisputed queen of salt and rock, the woman who had once captured the mother of dragons at sea. The bards sang of that deed, making Yara into a figure of legend. But those who knew her, who sailed under her, sensed the unspoken truth. If ever a black-shaped sword on the horizon, if ever a flame lit the heavens in the shape of wings, Yara would wonder if Daenerys Targaryen had come at last to settle old scores. And somewhere far away, across the seas or in the halls of King's Landing, Daenerys Targaryen remembered Pike's cold stones, the chains around Drogon, the bitterness of betrayal. She might keep the peace for the sake of her vision, but grudges, like dragons, did not die easily. The memory of that night on the sea would haunt them both, a testament to what it meant to reach for absolute power and a reminder that even in a world of dragons, the hunger for freedom could drive men and women to unimaginable extremes. Yara had seized the day, had snatched a victory that left the realm forever changed. But at night, standing on the battlements, she would look out at the dark waters and remember the sound of Drogon's roars echoing among Pike's towers. She would wonder if she had truly won, or if all she had done was transform one threat into a creeping shadow that would follow her always. The waves crashed below, eternal and unchanging, and she could almost hear them whisper, "Freedom, bought with blood." A fleeting thing, as fleeting as storms and alliances. But for now, the Iron Islands had it. For now, that was enough. The days following Daenerys Targaryen's departure from Pike passed in a haze of disquieting calm. Yara Greyjoy had finally seized the independence the Iron Islands had sought for generations. Yet it had come at the highest cost. A betrayal that haunted her dreams. She had tried to ensure her people would remain free of any crown's rule, forging a tenuous agreement with the Dragon Queen. Now, the battered remnants of the Iron Fleet lay anchored in Lordsport, wind-worn sails flapping in the gusts, hulls scarred by dragonfire. Beyond the harbor's jagged rocks, the open sea stretched away into a gray horizon. At times, Yara would stand on the docks, scanning the sky in quiet apprehension. She knew Daenerys had retreated, at least for now, but she also knew grudges born in the flames of betrayal could smolder for years before bursting into open warfare again. None of the Ironborn said it outright, but they too felt the lingering weight of tension. They had, for one brief, harrowing stretch, held the mother of dragons in their grasp, and had pinned her mightiest child within Pike's walls. It was a victory unlike any in living memory, one that turned every head across the Seven Kingdoms. Yet that same victory had forced them into a precarious truce, with no illusions of peace should they step out of line. Yara could sense that some of her captains still yearned for the old ways, for reaving and pillage, and she did not doubt that soon they might test the boundaries of the new agreement. Every night, she wondered if Daenerys' 3 dragons would come roaring back the moment Ironborn ships raided the wrong coast. In the gloom of Pike's halls, Yara found herself mired in the daily tasks of consolidating her rule. She held councils in the same drafty chamber where her father Balon had once sat, the walls still damp with brine, the windows crusted with salt. Her captains gathered around a rough-hewn table marked with scratchings to represent their fleet formations. She watched their faces, some stony with wariness, some lit by an eager, bloodthirsty glint at the prospect of renewed raids. Others were uncertain, torn between pride in their legendary exploit and terror at the risk of reprisal. Theon hovered near Yara's side for most of these meetings. He seemed uneasy, as though expecting any moment that the fragile peace would disintegrate. He had changed in the wake of their daring gambit, perhaps hardened, but also haunted by the memory of Daenerys's blazing fury and Drogon's roars echoing off Pike's crumbling towers. He often gazed out the narrow windows, as if searching the skies for the shape of vengeful wings. One cool morning, after the salted wind had turned raw with the promise of rain, Yara addressed her captains in council for the first time since Daenerys's departure. Most had assembled in thick cloaks and rough-spun tunics, the smell of fish oil lamps mingling with damp cloth. Yara stood at the head of the table, fists braced on its splintered edge. "We have our independence," she said, her voice echoing off the salt-stained walls. "Daenerys Targaryen has signed it herself. No longer must we kneel. We are free to govern ourselves, to shape our own destiny." Kelna Pike, a tall woman with a scar running from her chin to her ear, slammed her calloused hand down on the table. "For how long?" she asked bluntly. "You saw the dragons overhead. The agreement means nothing if the mother of dragons decides it does. She has the power to wipe us out." Yara's jaw tightened. She swore not to attack so long as we hold to the terms no raids on Westerosi shores. Whether we trust that vow or not, we need time to rebuild. Our ships are damaged, our men are weary. Let the rumor of dragons keep others away while we strengthen ourselves. Then, if Daenerys does break faith, we'll be prepared. Another captain, Harlan Saltcliffe, grumbled, "What does it mean for us if we can't reave? Pillage is all we know. We don't sow. The Iron Islands can't feed themselves off these rocky soils. If we can't raid, we starve." A chorus of mutters and nods rippled through the assembled men. The harsh truth was known to every Ironborn. Reaving was not just a twisted tradition, it was the bedrock of their survival. Their isles yielded little beyond fish and salt. For centuries, they had lived by the iron price, claiming what they needed from vulnerable coasts. Now their newly won independence forbade it or threatened them with annihilation if they attempted it in Targaryen territory. "The realm is vast," Yara said, keeping her voice level. "Our agreement specifically states we will not raid the mainland under the Queen's protection. That doesn't mean we can't look elsewhere. There are free cities in Essos, many of them vulnerable or embroiled in conflicts of their own. If we sail east, we might find new opportunities for plunder or trade. The Stepstones remain a pirate's nest, and if we carefully choose our targets there, we might avoid rousing Daenerys' wrath. Or we turn to privateering, raiding the ships of any lords who break peace with us. There are ways to keep the Ironborn strong without inviting Dragonfire." Some captains looked unconvinced, but Theon, standing at Yara's side, cleared his throat. "We'll also expand our fishing fleets," he said. "We have little farmland, but the seas around the Isles are rich if we fish them responsibly. We can salt the catch and sell it to merchants who pass through. We can even improve our harbors, build better storehouses." A few men scoffed. Fishing had always been the domain of lesser thralls, not a proud occupation for reavers. But in the face of Daenerys' dragons, perhaps pride would yield to necessity. Yara nodded, meeting each captain's gaze in turn. "We'll grow stronger with each passing moon," she said. "I will not see the Ironborn become beggars, nor will I see us burnt to cinders because we were too stubborn to adapt." The council murmured uncertain agreement. Kelna Pike spat on the floor, half in disgust, half in uneasy acceptance. At length, the meeting dissolved, leaving Yara and Theon alone in the drafty hall as the captains filed out. She leaned on the table, weariness catching up with her. "They won't forget how we took Daenerys," Theon said after a moment, his voice soft. "They see it as the greatest raid in Ironborn history and the greatest danger. You've given them freedom, but they don't know how to use it if it doesn't allow them to raid the coasts as they always have." Yara sighed. "We'll make them learn. The old ways might be precious to them, but the old ways nearly saw us destroyed. I won't let Pike become a blackened ruin for the sake of reaving a few fishing villages on the mainland." "And if the Queen's vengeance comes anyway?" Theon asked quietly. Yara said nothing. She could only stare at the gnarled table. The truth was that no fortress, no matter how remote, could easily stand against 3 grown dragons. The moment Daenerys decided to break her vow or interpret the agreement differently, nothing would prevent Pike from being reduced to molten stone. Yara had gambled that Daenerys' sense of justice would hold, that the queen truly wanted peace rather than endless destruction. Yet after capturing and chaining her, Yara felt the precariousness of that assumption like a blade at her throat. Days turned into weeks, and the Iron Islands settled into an uneasy routine. Their newly minted independence was recognized in official letters sealed with the three-headed dragon of House Targaryen, letters that were delivered to great lords across Westeros. Many roared with indignation. Others shrugged, as the Iron Islands had long been troublesome and not worth immediate confrontation. The scattered domain of House Lannister, still reeling from internal strife, could not spare the ships to challenge Yara. The North was too focused on its own troubles, with rumors of White Walkers, whispers that many still scoffed at, while the Vale's young Lord Robert was content to remain behind the Aerys' impenetrable heights. Dorne, rumored to be in partial alliance with Daenerys, offered no comment. And so, a fragile peace held. Yet Yara could sense the tension building, like a line of storm clouds hovering on the western horizon. One day, those clouds would burst open. The only question was whose lightning would strike first. One brisk morning, with the sky overcast and the wind carrying a sting of salt, Yara stood on the ramparts of Pike, gazing down at the swirling waters below. The tide was coming in, crashing against the rocks in great white plumes. The fortress's ancient towers jutted sharply over the sea, connected by a series of swaying bridges. Their condition had improved little since the days of King Balan's rule. Maintenance had not been a high priority in the face of constant war and reaving. She watched the waves hurl themselves at Pike's base, spraying up to the lowest windows. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, the old man's grim litany about the drowned god and the iron price. Balan had died chasing a dream of independence that ended in humiliation. But Yara had achieved it at last, in a way he never could have foreseen. She had done it on her own terms, though those terms were spattered with ash and burned wood from dragon fire. She wondered if, in the watery halls of the drowned god, Balan Greyjoy gazed upon her with pride or with rage. Movement at the corner of her vision caught her attention. She turned to see a slight, wiry figure in a hooded cloak stepping carefully along the narrow walkway. Theon. He approached, stopping beside her at the ledge, the wind tugging at his dark hair. Shadows ringed his eyes as though nightmares claimed his sleep. But there was a quiet determination in his expression. "Sister," he said, voice low. "We've had word from the mainland. Ravens arrived from the north. They carry sealed messages for you, for the Queen of the Iron Islands." Yara's brow arched. "From the north? Jon Snow, I assume." Theon hesitated, as though the name itself stirred a host of painful memories. "Aye, from him. He sent an envoy, apparently. They wish to discuss an alliance, or so the letter claims. They want your ships, Yara, to help in their war." The letter also mentions something about the threat from beyond the wall. Yara snorted. "The undead. The White Walkers. We've heard the rumors. It's been said for years, but no one's seen a living corpse on these shores." "Jon Snow believes it," Theon said. "Daenerys believed it too, once. She might still. That was part of why she sailed for the north before our ambush. She wanted to form alliances to face this threat. Or so she said," Yara muttered, glancing at the sky. "If it's real, then it's the North's problem. The Iron Islands have troubles enough without sailing for the frozen wastes." Theon's voice took on a cautious note. "He's offering something in return. Safe trade routes along the west coast, plus shipments of grain. Perhaps the north is more fertile now that winter recedes. They've had a partial thaw, or so rumor says. We need grain, sister, if not now, then soon." Yara weighed his words. The Iron Islands were indeed short on resources. Independence was one thing, but sustaining it required trade, or loot, or both. And reaving along Westeros's shores was out of the question unless they wanted to break the fragile truce with Daenerys. If the king in the north was truly offering grain in exchange for ships, perhaps it was worth listening. Yet she was wary. Yara remembered how Theon had once taken Winterfell, how he had betrayed and been betrayed. The north would not forget that easily. Jon Snow was rumored to be more forgiving than most. But would his bannermen follow suit? If House Stark's allies found a reason to turn on the Ironborn, it might give Daenerys the opening she needed to break their agreement without seeming the aggressor. "I'll meet the envoy," Yara said finally, "but we do so on my terms. If they want a parley, they come to Pike. Let them see how precarious our fortress stands, how easily we could cast them into the sea. And if this talk of the dead is true, we'll hear them out. But I'll not send my ships north to freeze unless I have firm promises of what we gain in return." Theon nodded, a faint flicker of relief passing over his features. "I'll arrange it." That same afternoon, A pair of ravens took wing from Pike's rookery, bearing Yara's curt reply to Jon Snow in Winterfell. She offered to host his envoys, promising safe passage to Pike and back. While they waited for a response, the Iron Islands went about their business, patching hulls, forging anchors, and scraping the barnacles from the battered prows of warships that had once pinned a dragon to the deck. Days later, the northern delegation arrived. A single ship bobbed into Lordsport's harbor under a flag of pale gray and white, the dire wolf of House Stark. Yara observed from the docks with Theon at her side, an honor guard of iron-born warriors behind them. The Starks, she thought, had once ruled the North for thousands of years. Now they were led by a man known as the White Wolf, king in the North, but rumor also called him Aegon Targaryen's nephew, a secret child of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark, though many still doubted the story. And Daenerys was said to have named him Warden of the North after her brief alliance with him. All the politics and tangled bloodlines made Yara's head spin. She merely wanted to ensure the Iron Islands remained free of it all. From the Stark ship emerged a small party of half a dozen. Two wore heavy furs, their breaths visible in the chilly air despite it being well past mid-year. Another figure wore the robes of a maester, and at their head was a woman with auburn hair shot through with silver at the temples, clad in a thick gray cloak with a wolf-shed pin on her shoulder. Sansa Stark, Yara realized, from the descriptions she had heard, Lady of Winterfell, or perhaps Queen in the North's stead, depending on who told the tale. Yara saw no sign of Jon Snow. Perhaps he was occupied or had chosen not to make the journey. Sansa approached calmly, though she could not hide a flicker of discomfort when she spotted Theon among Yara's retinue. Her gaze lingered on him for a few tense heartbeats. Theon lowered his eyes, as though he half expected a rebuke, but Sansa kept her face composed. She inclined her head to Yara, though not as a subject, more as one equal acknowledging another. Lord Theon. Yara Greyjoy, Sansa said. Her voice was steady, though it carried the undertone of a proud northerner who did not shy from the memory of Theon's old betrayals. I come on behalf of my brother Jon Snow, king in the North. Your letters suggested you would welcome an envoy. Yara took a step forward. She was taller than Sansa by a bit, and she tried to use her height to convey authority. We invited you to parley. We've heard you want ships, and I hear talk of an army of the dead. Come inside. These docks are no place for serious discussion. Sansa nodded. The group followed Yara along a winding stone path that led up to Pike's main gate, crossing narrow bridges suspended over crashing waves. Sansa Stark's companions stared below, likely unnerved by the dizzying drop and the wet, rotted planks that swayed beneath their boots. More than one man went pale, and Sansa herself pressed her lips together at the sight of the churning sea. Yet she walked steadily, refusing to show fear. Inside Pike's walls, they emerged into the same great hall where Yara had received Tyrion Lannister. The air was thick with the smell of tallow candles and sea brine. Tapestries in tattered condition lined the walls, depicting scuttled ships and iron-born victories from ages past. Sansa and her group were escorted to a long table of dark wood. Yara seated herself at its head, Theon just behind her. The northern visitors took seats only when Yara gestured for them to do so. Wine, Yara offered, though it was the cheap, sour vintage typical of the Isle. Sansa politely accepted, sipping with caution. The others followed suit. Once the courtesies were observed, Yara leaned forward. So, Lady of Winterfell, speak. Sansa set her cup down. My brother, Jon Snow, sends his regards. He regrets that he cannot come in person. Threats in the north demand his presence at Winterfell, and the snows have not fully melted beyond the neck. While the seasons shift, the danger remains. Yara's mouth curved slightly. The dead? Are they truly real? We hear stories that your brother led an expedition beyond the wall and came back with such tales. Hard to believe. Sansa's eyes did not waver. It's real. I've seen things I never thought possible in Winterfell's own courtyard. An undead wight, captured and brought south to prove this threat existed. It's no hoax. The Night King was defeated at great cost, but remnants of the undead remain scattered. Some fear they may regroup in the far north. Jon believes the threat is not fully over. Theon's brow furrowed. Yara heard the muttering of a few Ironborn guards behind her. She cleared her throat. "And you've come because?" Sansa took a breath. "Because the North cannot handle every threat alone. Winterfell is undermanned and must rebuild after the wars. Additionally, there are conflicts stirring in the Riverlands and tensions in the Westerlands. The realm is fragile. Jon has found that if we do not unify, the smallest spark could set all of Westeros ablaze. We propose an alliance with the Iron Islands, one that is not under the Targaryen banner, but direct. You have your independence, we respect that. In return, we need your ships to help patrol our northern coasts and keep the Bay of Ice secure. We also need maritime support if any undead or pirate threats come from the Shivering Sea." Yara arched an eyebrow. "Sounds like a tall order. And what do we gain, aside from potential enemies and a share in your troubles?" Sansa's reply was immediate. "Grain shipments from the north, timber if we can spare it, and trade, legitimate trade, not pillage. Under a formal alliance, northern merchants could buy salt-harvested fish, iron, and whatever goods you produce. You would have access to fair markets in White Harbor. We also offer the promise of mutual defense. If any power threatens the Iron Islands, whether Lannister or Targaryen or a foreign invader, House Stark would come to your aid." A hush settled over the hall. Yara glanced at Theon, who stared at Sansa with a complex mixture of guilt and longing. He opened his mouth, then closed it as though unsure if he should speak. Instead, Yara turned back to Sansa. "You speak for Jon Snow and you speak of alliances," Yara said. "But is your brother truly prepared to stand against Daenerys Targaryen if she decides she wants the Iron Islands back under her rule?" Sansa's expression flickered. "Jon once allied with Daenerys against the undead. He believed in her cause, believed she could be a good queen. But we also know that your conflict with Daenerys has complicated matters. Jon does not seek a war with her, far from it. He hopes for peace across the realm. But if she attacks the Iron Islands in violation of her treaty, she would lose the North's support. Jon would not stand by idly while she broke faith." She hesitated. "I cannot promise open war against her, but I do promise that the North will not align with her in any aggression toward you. And if we stand together, perhaps she would think twice before risking a second humiliating battle against your fleets." Yara weighed those words. It was not the ironclad guarantee she might have desired, but in these times, alliances were seldom so clear. She drummed her fingers on the table, gaze flicking to Sansa's retinue. They looked earnest enough, northerners with none of the foppish airs of King's Landing courtiers. "And the grain?" she asked at length. "We can feed our people on fish for a time, but we need grains to avoid famine if the fishing yields are poor." Sansa nodded. "White Harbor can supply a steady shipment. In return, we'll expect your ships to aid us in patrolling." "Simple enough." Yara stared at the map pinned to the table, a rough outline of Westeros with the Iron Islands off the western coast and the north sprawling far above. The notion of bridging that distance felt absurd, but perhaps alliances could cross wide seas if the terms were right. "Agreed in principle," she said, "but I want it in writing. And I want immediate deliveries of grain once the next harvest is in, not empty promises." Sansa's smile was thin, but it carried genuine relief. "You shall have them, along with a contingent of skilled shipwrights if we can spare them, men who learned in White Harbor's docks. They can help you repair your vessels or build new ones suited for northern waters." Theon finally found his voice. "Lady Sansa," he said quietly, not quite meeting her eyes. I'm glad you came. My sister is wise to make this alliance. We should work together. The days of Ironborn reaving in the north are over." Sansa regarded him for a moment, her expression guarded. Then she nodded curtly. They had better be. In the end, they struck a tentative bargain. Theon guided Sansa's party to private quarters for the night, though they insisted on sending half their men back to the ship. The next morning, negotiations resumed, culminating in a formal draft. The Iron Islands and the North recognized each other's sovereignty, promised mutual non-aggression, and pledged to open trade routes by sea. Yara insisted that the agreement remain separate from any Targaryen alliances, an independent bond. Sansa carefully noted that the North was not seeking war with House Targaryen, nor was it allied to it at present, but that it would not stand idle if the Queen violated the Iron Islands' recognized independence. They sealed the arrangement with quill and wax. Yara pressed the golden kraken of House Greyjoy onto the hot wax while Sansa used a dire wolf seal for the Starks. The entire spectacle was witnessed by the Iron Islands captains and the northern retinue. Thus, a new link was forged, one that might prove vital in the uncertain times ahead. Shortly afterward, Sansa Stark and her companions prepared to depart. It was then that Sansa asked to speak to Theon privately. Yara, half suspecting what that conversation might entail, gave them space, waiting near the keep's entrance as Theon led Sansa onto a narrow walkway overlooking the sea. A stiff wind plucked at their cloaks. Neither seemed bothered by the cold. Yara could not hear their words, but she could see the tension in Theon's posture, the quiet intensity in Sansa's expression. They spoke for some minutes, Sansa's face shifting from guardedness to a flicker of sorrow, Theon's shoulders bowed in remorse. Finally, Sansa laid a gloved hand on Theon's arm. He shook his head, tears welling in his eyes, then nodded. A moment later, they parted. Sansa offered Yara a polite farewell. "Thank you for your hospitality," she said. "We'll leave you to your domain, hoping that when the time comes, you'll remember we stand together." Yara inclined her head. "Safe journey. If the seas treat you poorly, blame the drowned god." The attempt at humor fell flat, but Sansa dipped her chin once, then turned and crossed the courtyard to rejoin her companions. Moments later, the northern party was gone, trudging down to Lord Sport's docks. The tide carried them away, their ship's sails vanishing into the hazy distance. Yara approached Theon, who remained at the walkway's edge. He looked out over the roiling waves, eyes rimmed with red. When she came near, he spoke without turning. "She forgave me in her own way," he murmured, "for what I did to Winterfell, for failing to save her from the Boltons, for all of it. She said she understood the torment I went through. She didn't say she approved of it, but she let it go." Yara laid a hand on his shoulder. "That's good, Theon," he exhaled shakily. "I never thought I'd see the day. Maybe the North truly wants to move forward. Maybe they need friends as desperately as we do." Yara nodded, looking back out to where the northern ship had disappeared. "So be it," she said. "We'll see what comes of this alliance. In the meantime, we have a realm to secure." Life on the Iron Islands found a new rhythm in the following months. Captains set sail for the Stepstones, occasionally returning with tales of small-scale piracy or mercenary skirmishes, but also with cargo holds full of exotic spices, dyes, and once in a while, coin from captured smugglers. Traders from the north arrived in battered cogs, exchanging salted fish and iron ingots for sacks of flour and barley. Though the amounts were modest, they kept the Isles from wanting. Yara oversaw the renovation of Lord Sport's docks, ensuring deeper berths for larger ships, building storehouses that might shelter grain from the damp. More than once, she heard the grumblings of old reavers who missed the thrill of plundering the western coasts. But she reminded them that this adaptation was the only way to avoid angering the dragons. And most still remembered the sight of Drogon pinned under nets, with the recollection that such a beast might return to incinerate them. Summer's waning days brought rumors from the mainland. Cersei Lannister had reportedly died after a bout of illness, or poison, some said. The Iron Throne was in flux yet again, with half a dozen claimants sniffing around. Daenerys still ruled from Dragonstone, though she had never fully claimed King's Landing. Word said she had turned her attention eastward, forging alliances in Essos to rebuild her power base. Some whispered that she was quietly massing her forces, biding her time until she felt strong enough to seize the Iron Throne by force. Others said she had lost her taste for open conquest after her humiliating capture and the half-botched war that preceded it. Yara suspected the truth was somewhere in between. Daenerys might not crave mindless destruction, but she was no less determined to see her birthright realized. The Queen of Dragons would not vanish into obscurity. She was biding her time. As for the rumored father of Daenerys' unborn heir, some gossip insisted she carried Jon Snow's child after a fleeting romance. Others claimed it was Dario Naharis from her old Sells-Word company. Others still said the queen could not conceive at all. The realm's rumor mill churned ceaselessly, fueling half-truths and illusions. Yara tried to keep her distance from it, focusing on the tangible tasks at hand, securing her rule, growing the island economy, managing the old captains. Yet late at night, when the wind howled around Pike's towers, she would stare at the moonlit waves and feel a prickle of unease that one day dragons might darken the skies once more. Shortly after the harvest season, Theon brought her a message from a raiding vessel that had skirted the southern coasts. The captain claimed to have spotted a small cluster of Ironborn ships bearing Euron Greyjoy's sigil lurking near the stepstones. Euron, the mad pirate king who had once claimed the Seastone chair, had disappeared after his defeat at Daenerys' hands. Everyone assumed him dead or exiled. Now rumor said he had returned. Yara's blood chilled at the news. She remembered too well how cunning and dangerous Euron was, how he had nearly killed her once before. If he had somehow assembled a new band of cutthroats, he might pose a threat not just to her rule but to the entire region. He would not hesitate to sow chaos across the seas, possibly even provoke Daenerys or other powers if it benefited him. Yara could not let that serpent gain a foothold. After deliberation with Theon and her most trusted captains, Yara decided to dispatch a scouting fleet to confirm Euron's presence. She would not risk a massive engagement yet, but she wanted eyes on the stepstones. If Euron was there, he might be forging alliances with pirate lords or rogue cell sails. Such alliances could threaten the Iron Islands' tenuous stability. The reconnaissance mission took weeks. The scouts returned with scattered reports. Euron's banner had indeed been spotted on at least 2 ships, a battered flagship called the Silence among them, famed for its blood-red sails and rumors that the crew had their tongues cut out. They claimed Euron was working with a band of Lyseni pirates and that he had some strange magical relic aboard, perhaps a dragon horn stolen from the ruins of Valyria, though that could be pure myth. Nonetheless, Euron was alive and seemingly gathering strength. Yara felt a weight settle in her gut. Euron's re-emergence could mean trouble on multiple fronts. If he wanted the Seastone chair back, or if he sought revenge on Yara for defeating him and allying with Daenerys in the Old War, he might well attempt to raid the Iron Islands or sabotage Yara's fragile alliance with the North. He was cunning enough to weave illusions and feed false rumors, possibly to goad Daenerys into another confrontation with Yara. She called a council to discuss next steps. The hall was alive with nervous speculation. Some urged Yara to strike first, to lead the Iron Fleet to the Stepstones and hunt Euron down before he could consolidate power. Others advised caution, pointing out that engaging Euron far from home would leave the Iron Islands vulnerable to any opportunistic foes. Yara's gaze swept the room, finding each captain torn by the question of how best to defend their newborn freedom. "This is not the time for half measures," Kelna Pike said, voice strident. The scar on her cheek pulled taut. "Euron is a cancer. If we let him fester, he'll poison everything. We can't risk him forging an alliance with the Lyseni or the Volantene fleets. We should sail at once, crush him in the Stepstones, and show no mercy." Harlan Sallcliffe, the older Reaver who had once commanded a portion of the fleet, shook his head. "That may be what Euron wants, to lure us away from Pike and strike a blow to her home. He's cunning and he's unpredictable. If we chase him like dogs, we risk everything." Theon stood by Yara's side, brow creased. He looked at her as though seeking her direction. Yara leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. "We cannot ignore Euron, but I won't commit all our ships to the Stepstones, not yet. We'll muster a capable force, enough to defend ourselves if he sails for Pike and enough to mount a strong reconnaissance mission. If we find him vulnerable, we strike. If we find him too well supported, we fall back." "How large of a fleet?" asked Kelna, arms crossed. Yara considered. 10 ships. Enough to hold their own, not enough to leave Pike undefended. "I'll lead them myself. Euron is my responsibility." Theon tensed. "Let me lead them, sister. You're the queen of the Iron Islands. If something happens to you out there..." "No," Yara cut him off. "I won't hide behind these walls while others risk their lives. This is my fight. Euron nearly destroyed us once. I won't let him do it again." She could see Theon's protest in his eyes, but he bowed his head in acquiescence. The council ended with the plan set. A small but elite squadron would sail to the Stepstones to locate Euron and gauge his strength. Meanwhile, Theon and the remaining captains would keep Pike fortified, ensuring that if Euron attempted a diversionary attack, he would find the Iron Islands well guarded. Preparations began at once. Yara chose 9 of her toughest vessels and her own flagship, the Iron Victory, still bearing scars from Drogon's onslaught. Her crews stocked them with provisions, ballista bolts, barrels of water, and salted fish. Her black sails, emblazoned with the Golden Kraken, were refitted. Men sharpened swords on deck, tested crossbows, and practiced with the chain nets they had once used to snare a dragon. Though Yara doubted they would be capturing any dragons on this voyage, the Ironborn had learned to value such tools of surprise. The morning she set sail dawned with a pale sun filtered by a drifting mist, the sea calm but carrying a latent sense of power beneath its surface. Yara stood on the prow of the Iron Victory wearing boiled leather over a dark tunic, her hair bound in a tight knot. She gazed back at the shoreline of Pike, wondering if she would see it again or if Euron Greyjoy would be her death. Theon stood on the quay, flanked by a handful of captains, their faces grim. She lifted a hand in farewell, and Theon nodded solemnly, his expression pained as though he feared losing her. A horn's low note signaled departure. Rowers dipped their oars, sails unfurled, and the squadron moved out of Lordsport's harbor, cutting a path through the gray water. The wind carried a faint promise of storms to the south. Yara set her course accordingly, wanting to avoid any unnecessary entanglement with the elements. At her side on the quarterdeck stood Kelma Pike, silent and alert, scanning the horizon for signs of enemy sails. The voyage south was fraught with tension. The Stepstones were a known haven for pirates and smugglers, a cluster of islands scattered between Westeros and Essos, each claimed or abandoned by various powers over time. Dozens of hidden coves existed where Euron's ships might lurk. As the Iron Fleet's vanguard, Yara's squadron advanced cautiously, sending out small scouting parties to check suspicious inlets. Days went by with no sign of Euron, though they encountered a few Lyseni corsairs who promptly fled rather than engage. Yara grew restless. If Euron was here, he was well hidden. On the fifth day, at sunset, they found a burned-out galley adrift near a jagged rock formation. Its hull was scorched, the sails in tatters. Approaching carefully, Yara's men boarded it to scavenge. They found bodies riddled with arrows, tongues cut out. The word silence had been carved into a broken plank. A chill settled in Yara's stomach. This was Euron's calling card, an act of warning or ritual cruelty. That night, anchored in a sheltered bay, Yara paced the deck of the Iron Victory, her thoughts churning. The soft lapping of water against the hull did nothing to soothe her. She half expected Euron's ships to appear at any moment, silent as wraiths, eager to ambush them. She remembered the nightmares Theon had shared about Euron's madness, how he reveled in blood sacrifice and claimed to have sailed to Valyria itself. If even a fraction of his boasts were true, he was a monster best put down quickly. Yet where was he? On the seventh day since leaving Pike, the Iron Fleet scouts reported smoke on the horizon near a remote atoll. Yara gave the order to investigate. As they neared the location, they saw a cluster of ships moored around a stony spit of land, ringed by sharp reefs. Smoke rose from some structure on shore, perhaps a temporary camp. Yara counted at least 6 ships, each bearing the markings of various SOC pirates, but one was distinct, black sails with the sigil of a red eye crossed by a shard of driftwood, the symbol Euron sometimes used. Another flew the golden kraken on red, though battered. Euron's personal banner. She felt her pulse quicken, a mixture of anger and grim satisfaction. Finally, they had found him. Kelna Pike stood at Yara's side, peering through a spyglass. "He's got a decent force," Kelna observed. "They're anchored behind the reefs, probably with watchers posted. If we approach openly, we'll lose the element of surprise." Yara's jaw tightened. "We can't slip in unnoticed with 10 ships. This isn't exactly a wide bay, and the reefs will make it tricky. Euron must know these waters well. Still, I won't turn back now." They hatched a plan to send in 3 of their ships from the north, luring out Euron's corsairs, while Yara took the other 7 around the south. If Euron attempted to flee, they'd cut off his escape. It was an imperfect strategy, given the reefs, but it was all they had. As dusk approached, Yara's squadron moved into position. The northern trio sailed close to the atoll, hoisting visible lanterns to draw attention. Sure enough, 2 of Euron's pirate allies pulled anchor and glided out to intercept, no doubt eager for plunder. The skirmish began abruptly. Ballista bolts whistled over the water, crossbow fire crackled, and men shouted war cries. Under the cover of that fight, Yara led the rest of her ships southward, navigating carefully around the coral-studded shoals. The Iron Victory's hull scraped once or twice, setting Yara's teeth on edge, but they pressed on. As they rounded a cluster of rocks, they spotted Euron's flagship, the Silence, anchored near a jagged piece of land that jutted out like a broken fang. The ship looked imposing even in partial silhouette, its hull a deep black, sails dyed the color of dried blood. Yara could see shapes on the deck, crewmen with no tongues, rumor said, loyal to Euron in fanatical devotion or bound by fear. And there, at the prow, stood a tall figure in black leather with a patch over one eye and hair whipped by the wind. Euron Greyjoy himself. Her heart pounded with fury. This was the man who had butchered their uncle Victarion, who had cast Theon adrift and boasted of wanting to wed Daenerys Targaryen, who had once seized the Salt Throne by cunning and terror. Yara raised her sword high, the signal to attack. Her ship spread out in a half-moon formation, ballistae aimed at the silence. A horn blast from Euron's deck answered her. Suddenly, 2 more pirate ships appeared from behind the atoll's far side, oars churning. They had been hidden, waiting for a flank attack. Yara cursed under her breath. Still, they outnumbered Euron's vessels. The ocean erupted in chaos. Ironborn warships surged forward, iron-tipped rams crashing against pirate hulls. Grappling hooks soared through the air, men bellowed as they leapt onto enemy decks. The clang of steel rang out across the waves. The smell of salt and blood mingled under the pale light of a waning sun. Euron's men fought with savage ferocity, laughing in the face of mortal danger, some even slicing off their own tongues in a twisted show of devotion. Yara forced her way through the battle, eyes fixed on the silence. The Iron Victory took on 2 pirate ships at once, colliding with a screech of splintering timbers. Crossbow bolts whistled from the rigging. Yara shouted commands to her crew, urging them to board and take the fight to the enemy. She was no stranger to close combat. Her father had taught her to handle an axe and sword from a young age. Now she wielded a cutlass, hacking aside a pirate who lunged at her from the rail. Kelna Pike led a boarding party onto the Silence's starboard side, cutting down the first wave of defenders. Yara saw Euron at the helm, grinning madly, holding a wickedly curved blade in one hand, a strange horn slung across his back. He shouted something inaudible over the din, beckoning Yara to face him. The wave of his men parted as though he commanded them like puppets. With a roar, Yara leapt onto the Silence, using a grappling rope to swing across the gap. She landed hard on the deck, knees bending to absorb the impact. Around her, ironborn and mute pirates slashed and grappled. The stink of tar and blood choked the air. She wasted no time, heading straight for Euron. Their eyes met, his one eye gleaming with unholy mirth. "Yara," he called mockingly, lifting his arms in a theatrical gesture. "My dear niece, come to pay your respects to your king." "You've no claim to that title," she spat, gripping her sword. "You're a rotting carcass, Euron, and I'll toss you to the gulls." Euron laughed, a wild, booming sound. "You took my prize once. You spoiled my chances with the Dragon Queen. Now you think you can end me." He whipped out a long knife with his other hand. "Come then. Show me your worth." Yara lunged, sword flashing. Euron parried with the curved blade, sparks flying. His speed and strength were formidable. He countered with a slash at her side. She ducked, narrowly avoiding disembowelment. Around them, the deck was a nightmare of shrieks and the thud of bodies. Pirates with slashed throats or ironborn with crossbow bolts in their ribs collapsed in pools of blood. They traded blows, each circling the other, boots skidding on blood-slick planks. Yara hissed as Euron's knife nicked her upper arm, drawing hot crimson. She retaliated with a brutal kick to his knee, causing him to stumble. He laughed even through the pain, as though the violence was a lover's kiss. Over her shoulder, Yara glimpsed Kelna hacking away at a cluster of pirates, but more enemies poured up from below decks. This had to end quickly, or the Silence might overwhelm them. She feinted low, aiming a slash at Euron's thigh, but he twisted aside, answering with a hard elbow to her jaw. Pain exploded in her skull. She staggered back, vision swimming. Euron advanced, brandishing his blades. "Look at you, dear niece. You overcame a dragon, but can you overcome the crow's eye?" She wiped blood from her lip, ignoring the throbbing in her jaw. "You talk too much, uncle." She stepped inside his guard with sudden ferocity, slashing at his left forearm. Euron jerked back, but not in time to avoid a deep cut. Dark blood seeped through his sleeve. He snarled, face twisting with rage. Before he could recover, Yara brought her sword around for a finishing strike, aiming for his head. Euron raised his curved blade to block, steel clashing in a shower of sparks. He twisted his wrist, hooking her sword away, then lunged forward, trying to stab her face with his knife. She leaned back just enough to avoid the worst of it, but the tip caught her cheek, splitting the skin. Warm blood trickled down her face, salty on her lips. The deck lurched as the Silence took a broadside hit from one of Yara's allied ships. With splintered, men toppled. Yara used the sudden jolt to break away, her sword arm trembling with exertion. Euron shook his wounded arm, spattering the deck with red droplets, that crazed grin still plastered on his face. Then, from behind Euron, Kelna sprang into view, raising a heavy boarding axe. She swung at Euron's back. He pivoted with preternatural speed, catching the haft of her axe with his curved sword. Kelna snarled, her scarred face contorted with effort. She pressed forward, trying to push him off balance. Yara seized the chance, darting in to slash at Euron's side. But Euron was far craftier than they expected. He yanked Kelna forward and simultaneously spun, forcing Yara to pull back or risk hitting Kelna. Off balance, Kelna stumbled and Euron plunged his knife into her abdomen with brutal force. Kelna let out a guttural choke, her eyes wide. Yara screamed in rage, watching a spurt of blood gush from Kelna's mouth. "Kelna!" Yara roared, hurling herself at Euron. But he yanked his knife free and kicked Kelna's body toward Yara, making her stagger to catch her mortally wounded ally. The precious seconds were enough for Euron to lunge to the ship's rail, shouting something in a guttural language to the silent crew. At once, half of them disengaged from the melee and rushed to follow their captain. Yara gently lowered Kelna to the deck. Her friend's eyes fluttered, blood bubbling on her lips. "Kill that bastard," Kelna croaked, then her body went limp. A red haze of fury descended on Yara. She rose, ignoring the pain of her wounds, and sprinted after Euron. The fighting parted around her, or perhaps she simply barreled through it. She saw him clamber onto a small launch he had prepared, a cunning trick to slip away from the midst of battle. He shoved off from the silence, beckoning for his men to row. The other pirate ships were in flames or locked in a losing struggle. Euron was making a personal escape. Yara rushed to the rail, searching for a rope to swing down. At that moment, a crossbow bolt whistled past her ear, lodging in the wood with a dull thud. The deck pitched again, causing her to grip the rail to keep from tumbling into the sea. She glimpsed Euron's mad grin as the small boat pulled away, slicing through the choppy water toward open sea. "Coward!" Yara screamed, voice ragged with grief and anger. Another crossbow bolt forced her to duck. By the time she regained her footing, Euron was out of immediate range. She wanted to leap in the sea and swim after him, but that would be suicide. Wounded, exhausted, she could only watch him recede into the twilight. Still, victory belonged to the Iron Fleet that night. One by one, Euron's allied ships were boarded or burned. The Silence was captured, though heavily damaged by the collision. The surviving enemy pirates were cut down or taken prisoner. Yet Yara felt no triumph. Kelna lay dead and Euron had slipped away once again. While the Iron Victory's crew doused flames and tended the wounded, Yara stood on the deck of the Silence. The vessel was eerily silent indeed. The tongues of its crew had been torn out, the decks slick with gore. A few dismembered body parts hung from the mast as macabre trophies. She forced herself to quell a rising wave of nausea. Euron's brand of horror had always been thorough. Amid the carnage, she found something strapped to the mainmast, a large horn bound with old leather etched with strange runes. She recalled the rumors that Euron had once carried a dragon horn from Valyria, said to bind dragons to the wielder's will or kill the one who blew it. She eyed it warily. Was this the artifact Euron used to boast about? Or just an elaborate fake to terrify the superstitious? Regardless, she had it removed and stowed in a crate. The last thing the Ironborn needed was more monstrous curiosities in Euron's hands. By dawn, the silence of the aftermath felt like a funeral hush. Of the 10 ships Yara had brought, 2 were sunk and 3 were severely damaged. Nearly half her men were dead or wounded. They had annihilated Euron's pirate allies, seized the Silence, but the cost was steep and Euron himself had escaped. Yara tended to Kelna's body with her own hands, cleaning the blood from her friend's face. She had known Kelna since childhood, and the sting of losing her in such a violent way reignited Yara's hatred for Euron tenfold. They limped away from the atoll, towing the captured Silence behind them. The vessel's hull was cracked in places, and Yara wasn't even sure it could be salvaged. But it was a trophy of sorts, proof that Euron had lost his flagship, though not his life. That might hamper him. Still, Yara suspected that wherever Euron went, he would conjure more horrors, forging new alliances with pirates or sell sails who feared the dragons and saw an opportunity in chaos. The journey back to the Iron Islands was grim. They braved storms that lashed them with sheets of rain, forcing them to stay below decks when the waves grew dangerously high. Yara's injuries festered, the slash on her cheek scabbing over into an ugly wound that might leave a scar to match Kelna's. She refused to let the pain slow her. Whenever she felt fatigue gripping her bones, she reminded herself of the vow she had made over Kelna's still form, to end Euron's terror once and for all. At last, they sighted Pike's jagged towers through the swirling sea mist. The battered ships dragged into Lordsport's harbor, greeted by a crowd of anxious onlookers. Theon rushed to the quay, relief and alarm mingling on his face as he helped Yara step onto the dock. He saw the bloodied bandage on her arm, the lines of exhaustion in her face. "What happened?" he asked in a hushed voice. "We fought Euron," Yara said flatly. "We destroyed most of his fleet, took the Silence, but Euron escaped." Theon's jaw tightened. "Kelna?" Yara bowed her head. "Dead." A wave of sorrow passed over Theon. He squeezed his sister's shoulder gently. "I'm sorry." She nodded, swallowing hard. "So am I. But we live and we'll keep the Iron Islands safe, no matter what it takes." In the days that followed, they saw to the dead. Pyres were lit on the shores, smoke trailing out over the sea. Theon delivered a eulogy for Kelna, praising her courage. Yara joined him, silent tears marking her cheeks. The old tradition was to return ironborn bodies to the sea, but Kelna had wanted the funeral fire, a practice some of the more modern ironborn had adopted after seeing it on the mainland. So they built a pyre on the stony beach, letting the flames dance in the salt wind. With the silence now in Lordsport's docks, the Iron Islanders marveled at the ominous ship. Its hull was carved with leering faces, the deck soaked with old bloodstains that refused to wash away. Many insisted it was cursed. Yara ordered that it be stripped of valuables and scuttled if it proved irreparable. Some suggested renaming it and using it in the fleet, but the crew balked at the idea of sailing a vessel so tainted by Euron's atrocities. The final decision would come once they knew whether it could be re-rigged for ironborn use at all. As Yara recovered from her wounds, she considered the broader implications. Euron had been weakened, forced to flee with little more than a rowboat and a handful of men. But he was alive, and that meant he could scheme anew. The horn they'd found aboard the Silence whispered vile possibilities. If it truly was a dragon horn, then Euron's aim might have been to subdue Daenerys' dragons or sow chaos among them. He had once boasted of conquering the world through that horn's power. Yara grimaced at the memory, wondering if the artifact was real or some hollow piece of Valyrian fakery. Still, the fact that Euron carried it onto the Silence suggested he valued it. That alone was reason enough for Yara to lock it away. She stowed it in the deepest storeroom of Pike, behind iron bars guarded night and day by men she trusted. She had no desire to trifle with sorcery, but she refused to let Euron reclaim it. If it indeed had the power to bind dragons, it could become the spark that ignited a new war, and perhaps the final war for the Iron Islands. As autumn deepened, storms lashed the coasts, and trade from the north slowed. Sansa Stark's promised grain shipments arrived irregularly, but still arrived. The alliance with the North held, though Yara received letters expressing concern about Euron's reappearance. Sansa inquired whether Yara needed reinforcements, but the Ironborn prided themselves on self-sufficiency, so Yara thanked her yet declined. Let the North see that the Iron Islands could handle their own problems. Meanwhile, scattered rumors about Daenerys trickled in. Some said she had traveled to Volantis, forging an alliance with the high priests of the Red Temple. Others claimed she was spotted in Pentos, meeting with Magister Illyrio. A few insisted she was in King's Landing under a disguise, plotting with the remains of the Lannister loyalists. None could be confirmed. Daenerys Targaryen remained an enigma, her next move uncertain. One windy evening, Yara climbed to the top of Pike's highest tower, alone. The lantern she carried flickered in the gusts, casting dancing shadows across the worn stone steps. When she reached the parapet, she extinguished the flame, letting the moonlight be her guide. The sea roared far below, foam crashing against the base of the tower. She shivered, though not from the cold. Memories pressed in of Drogon thrashing in the courtyard below, of Daenerys' pale face, furious and defiant in captivity. She peered at the sky, half expecting to see the silhouette of a dragon gliding across the moon. But there was only darkness speckled with distant stars. In that hush, the ghosts of recent battles seemed to crowd around her. Kelna's dying breath, Euron's mocking laugh, Daenerys' stoic glare. The taste of salt lingered on her lips, mingling with the bitterness of old regrets. She wondered if her father, Balon, would have admired how far she had taken the Ironborn. True independence, no longer a dream but a reality, yet overshadowed by a precarious peace, menaced by dragons, threatened by a mad pirate, and reliant on trade with the North. If Balon stood here, would he scold her for forsaking the Reaver's path, or would he nod at her cunning and outwitting the dragons, if only temporarily? Perhaps he would have simply thrown her from the tower to claim the seat for himself. The old ways were brutal that way. She closed her eyes, letting the wind whip her hair. For now, they had survived. For now, the Iron Islands were free. But Yara knew that in Westeros, peace was as changeable as the tides. Alliances shifted, grudges lingered, and power beckoned with a seductive call. She had stolen Daenerys' power once. The queen would never forget that. Euron lurked somewhere at sea, wounded but not broken, plotting vengeance. The North saw the Iron Islands as a partner but had its own agenda. And across the ocean, beyond the horizon, old and nameless threats might stir. When Yara finally turned to descend, she set her jaw with renewed resolve. She would not let the Iron Islands be swallowed by any wave of destruction. She would fight for every breath of her people's freedom, no matter the cost. Balan's dream had become hers, but she had remade it in her own image, a dream of ironclad sovereignty, tempere. By the understanding that reaving alone could not sustain them. If that meant forging alliances with Starks and outfoxing Targaryens, so be it. If it meant strangling Euron with his own madness, she would do it. She made her way down the twisting stair, passing cold corridors lined with flickering torches. Guards saluted her, stepping aside. Outside, the wind howled around Pike's towers, sounding almost like the roar of a dragon. A trick of the night, Yara told herself. The dragons were far away for now. Yet in the corners of her mind, she heard them, the memory of scales beating against netted sails, of flames spitting in the gloom, of Daenerys' silent fury. One day that fury might return. One day wings might darken the sky over the Iron Islands again. And should that day come, Yara Greyjoy would stand on the battlements, unyielding as the black rock beneath her feet, determined to protect the freedom she had carved out of blood and treachery. She could only hope the drowned god, or whatever gods watched over these storm-racked isles, would grant her the strength to endure. Time wore on, the Iron Islands slowly knitting themselves into a stable realm. The warships underwent repairs, battered hulls reinforced with new timbers. Fishermen reported better-than-expected catches offshore, perhaps because the reaving disruptions had died down. The new storehouses held the salted fish safe from spoilage, and the Northerners' grain shipments supplemented what meager produce the Isles could cultivate in garden plots. The threat of famine receded, replaced by a cautious sense that maybe, just maybe, the Isles were on a path to lasting prosperity if they could keep the wolves and dragons at bay. Once or twice, a raven arrived from Winterfell bearing small updates on the North's affairs or messages from Sansa politely reminding Yara of the Alliance's obligations to keep a watch on the western seas. Yara complied, sending a few ships to patrol the Bay of Ice. They found no undead navies, but a few wandering smugglers who quickly surrendered. The arrangement was working, at least superficially. In the hush of winter's approach, Yara's mood turned introspective. She had lost much. Dear friends, the illusions of easy conquest, even the fleeting sense that she might become a truly unstoppable power. Instead, she was learning that ruling meant compromise, forging treaties instead of forging chains. She had never expected to be a ruler who spoke of trade routes, fisheries, and alliances. She had grown up longing for the day when she could lead Ironborn reavers on bold assaults across the coasts. But now she found herself discussing grain prices and naval blockades with her council. The memory of capturing Daenerys' dragons had become a legend in its own right, a ballad retold by minstrels who ventured to Pike's halls. They sang of Yara Greyjoy as the boldest raider in centuries, the one who chained fire incarnate. They rarely mentioned how precarious it was, how many Ironborn died in the process, or how it ended in a truce that left her always glancing over her shoulder for any sign of winged doom. The truth was more complicated than any song could capture. At last, late in the year, a small band of Northerners arrived unexpectedly in Lordsport. They carried a sealed letter from Sansa Stark requesting an urgent meeting with Yara. The tone was grave, hinting at potential upheavals among the southern lords that might affect the Iron Islands. Yara, already suspicious that the tenuous calm would soon crumble, prepared to host them. She received them in the newly refurbished Great Hall, where tapestries had been repaired, the floor scrubbed of old stains, and the braziers gave some warmth against the chill. The northern envoy was led by a man named Hallis Mormont, a distant cousin of the Mormonts of Bear Island. He was a hulking figure with a thick beard, wearing furs that looked out of place in the salt air of Pike. After the usual courtesies, he produced the letter, which Yara opened. She read swiftly, Theon at her shoulder. The letter detailed a sudden surge of Lannister influence in the Riverlands, where a new generation of that family sought to reclaim lost glory. More pertinently, rumors suggested that Daenerys Targaryen had left Dragonstone and was heading south, possibly to treat with these Lannisters. A joint Targaryen-Lannister pact might be forming, something that could threaten the North and the Iron Islands alike. Moreover, Euron Greyjoy had been spotted again, this time near Dorne, and some believed he aimed to curry favor with any power that could give him the means to strike back at Yara. A weariness settled over Yara. She had almost dared to hope for a quieter winter. Instead, the realm churned with new alliances, old ambitions stirring. The letter closed with a direct request. If trouble broke out, would the Iron Islands stand with the North against a resurgent Targaryen-Lannister axis, or any war stirred by Euron? Sansa needed an answer, and soon. She set the parchment down. Theon studied her face. "We knew something like this would happen eventually," he said quietly. Yara gave a curt nod. "We did. But the question is how we respond. Do we risk open conflict with Daenerys again? Our treaty states we must not raid her lands, and she's offered us independence so long as we keep the peace. If she truly teams up with the Lannisters, that complicates matters. Especially if Euron tries to join them to get revenge on us." Theon exhaled. "We can't ignore Euron's involvement. If he claims to represent us or slanders us in front of the Targaryens, it might provoke them to break the truce. And if the Lannisters see an advantage in harnessing Euron's madness, they might promise him the Seastone chair in exchange for Ironborn ships." Yara stood, pacing near the brazier. She imagined a scenario in which Euron cozied up to the Lannisters, painting Yara as the real threat. The Lannisters might be eager to quell the Iron Islands' independence. If Daenerys joined that cause, she would have an excuse to come after Yara. Then the sky might fill with dragons and Pike would burn. Yet Yara also recognized that the North's alliance was one of her few safeguards. If Sansa had promised to denounce Daenerys if the Queen broke the peace, that might give Daenerys pause. The North might threaten war from land while the Iron Islands threatened from sea. But if the Lannisters and Targaryen loyalists overcame that wedge, Yara could find herself isolated. At last, she looked at Hallis Mormont, who had waited silently by. "Return to Winterfell," Yara said. "Tell Lady Sansa that the Iron Islands remain committed to our alliance. We will stand against any threat that violates our independence or attempts to subjugate the North by force. But we do not seek war with Daenerys Targaryen if she respects the truce." Hallis nodded, understanding the delicate wording. "I will relay this exactly, my lady." That evening, after the Northerners departed, Yara summoned her remaining captains. She told them of the new developments: Daenerys moving south, possible Lannister alliances, Euron sightings. The tension in the hall was palpable. Some captains urged that they strike first, launching a preemptive raid on Casterly Rock to show the Lannisters they would not be cornered. Others argued to wait to see if diplomacy might hold. Yara once again insisted on caution. She would not spark a conflict unless forced to. The Iron Islands had too many vulnerabilities. Still, the war drums were beating faintly in the distance. Yara could sense them. Her every instinct told her that soon, the precarious calm would shatter. She tried to prepare for every eventuality. She oversaw the forging of new ballista bolts, the careful rechecking of the old chain nets, and the improvement of Pike's defenses. More storehouses were stocked with salted fish and meager produce. She even arranged for a partial garrison to stand watch on the smaller isles, in case of Euron's stealthy landings. In a moment of introspection, Yara considered sending Theon to Winterfell as a permanent envoy, partly to strengthen ties with Sansa, partly to keep him out of harm's way. But Theon refused. "I stand with you, sister," he said simply. "I won't leave you to face Euron or Daenerys alone." She accepted that with a nod, though a part of her worried about Theon's safety. If war erupted and dragons came, no fortress, no alliance, no iron chain would guarantee survival. And so the Iron Islands waited, perched on the edge of another storm. Ships patrolled the seas, eyes scanning for Euron's banner or the approach of foreign fleets. Ravens flitted in and out of Pike's rookery, bearing scraps of news from the mainland. Reports of Lannister assemblies, sightings of dragons in flight near Cracklaw Point, rumors that Daenerys' Dothraki had crossed the sea once more. The realm was moving, shifting, like continents scraping against each other below the ocean's surface. One day in early winter, a single raven arrived at dawn, its message sealed with black wax bearing a strange sigil. When Yara read it, her blood turned to ice. The letter was short and scrawled in a hand she half recognized. "Niece, did you think I would vanish? Did you think the silence was my only toy? Meet me at the sea, or I will bring your precious Pike down in smoke and horror. Soon the world will tremble. Euron." She stared at the words, her heart hammering. Theon read over her shoulder, color draining from his face. "He's taunting us," Theon said. "He wants a confrontation. Maybe he's found new allies. Maybe." Yara's mind whirred. She recalled the black horn strapped to the Silence's mast, the battered ships bearing Euron's banner. She had believed capturing the Silence would break his power, but evidently he had contingencies. If he truly had the ear of some southern lords or unscrupulous SOC backers, he might attempt a fresh assault on the Iron Islands. And if he carried a grudge not just against Yara but also against Daenerys, perhaps he planned to lure the dragons as well, unleashing chaos. She clenched the note in her fist. "We'll not cower," she said in a low voice. "If Euron wants a fight, we'll give him one. But on our terms. You'll lead another fleet out?" Theon asked, worry etched in his features. Yara exhaled. "I must. I won't let him appear off our shores unexpectedly. I'll meet him at sea, away from Pike, so fewer innocents are caught in the crossfire. Let him come with all his devils and illusions. I'll end this, one way or another." Theon nodded slowly. "I'll come with you." She gazed at her brother, seeing the old fear in his eyes, but also a steadfast determination. "Yes," she said. "I'd have it no other way." That night, she called her captains for one last council. She laid out the letter for them to see. Some wanted to ignore Euron's challenge, but Yara refused. "He'll only grow bolder if we hide behind our walls," she said. "He could slip in, sabotage our ships, or rally other pirates to strike at Pike. We must confront him on open waters where we excel." She planned for a robust fleet, more than the 10 ships she took last time. 20 might suffice, enough to overmatch Euron if he'd only gathered a ragged band of cutthroats. She also decided to have the chain nets and scorpion-like ballistae ready in case Euron had conjured something monstrous. The old tales of sea dragons or leviathans never seemed likely, but after capturing Daenerys' living dragons, Yara had learned not to dismiss wild possibilities. Word spread through the Isles, Yara Greyjoy would sail to face Euron's threat. Warriors flocked to her call. Even the recalcitrant old reavers who disliked her departure from the true Ironborn ways recognized that if Euron triumphed, they would all be enslaved to his madness. They sharpened axes, tested catapults, prepared for a decisive clash. Theon oversaw the logistics, ensuring ships were stocked for a prolonged engagement. Yara arranged for a heavy guard to remain in Pike under the command of a trusted lieutenant in case Euron attempted a trick. Within a fortnight, all was ready. 24 Ironborn war galleys assembled in Lord Sport's harbor, their sails black or dark gray, the Kraken standard rippling at the fore. The atmosphere on the docks was charged, reminiscent of the day they'd ambushed Daenerys. But this time, the enemy was not a foreign queen, it was the bloodkin who had terrorized them for years, Euron Greyjoy. At dawn, Yara stood on the prow of her flagship, the Iron Victory, flanked by Theon and her captains. Sea mist clung to the water's surface like a veil. The sails caught the breeze and the fleet glided out from the harbor. A hush fell over the bystanders who watched from the shore, farmers, fisherfolk, and the families of the warriors, all praying to the drowned god for victory. Yara glimpsed them briefly before the open sea swallowed the view. She did not know exactly where Euron would appear, only that he had challenged her to meet him. She guessed it would be somewhere west of the Iron Islands, in waters less patrolled by the mainland powers. So she charted a course along that route, sending scouts ahead to watch for unusual sails. For days, the fleet sailed, battered by the chill winter winds, blanketed by fog at night. Tension built in every heart as though the very ocean was holding its breath. At last, on the 4th day, a forward scout reported sightings of unfamiliar sails near a small archipelago known for treacherous currents. Yara's heart pounded. She gave the signal to converge, oars beating in unison, sails straining. The Iron Islands war galleys bore down on the location, determined to confront Euron once and for all. The day was dark, clouds blotting out the sun. The sea churned, gray and cold. As they neared, a line of ships came into view, a half-dozen with black or blood-red sails, reminiscent of Euron's style. Some bore crude sigils of eyes or twisted faces. Yara counted them, 8 ships, perhaps. Not enough to match her 24. Unless he had more hidden. Cautiously, she signaled the fleet to spread into a half-moon formation reminiscent of their trap for Daenerys. If Euron tried a feint or a pincer, they'd be ready. Theon checked the ballista crews. Men readied grappling hooks. The hush was broken only by the creak of timbers and the hiss of surf against hulls. Then a horn echoed across the water, a long, low note that sounded almost unnatural, trembling in the marrow of every bone. Yara felt the hair rise on her arms. She recognized something of that horn's tone from the one she'd taken from the silence, though that one had never been sounded. Was it a second dragon horn, or the same one? She had it locked away in Pike. Did Euron have another? The unearthly resonance thrummed through the mist, setting men's teeth on edge. From the center of Euron's formation, a single ship emerged, its sails ragged black, hull adorned with savage carvings of skulls. On its forecastle stood a tall, dark figure holding a great horn aloft. Euron. Even at this distance, Yara could see his mocking grin. He raised the horn and blew another note, deeper than before. The sound rattled across the waves, and some of Yara's men clapped their hands over their ears. And then, as though summoned by that dreadful call, the sea began to roil unnaturally to Yara's left. Swirls of foam churned, forming a circle. A monstrous shape broke the surface, a sea serpent? A half-mythical kraken? Yara's heart lurched. A huge, sinuous creature rose from the depths, scales glistening black-green, eyes glowing a sickly yellow. It let out a screeching roar that drowned out even the horn's echoes. Spray flew from its ridged spine as it arched above the waves, at least as long as 3 galleys end to end. Panic rippled through Yara's ranks. She heard exclamations of horror, prayers to the drowned god. Even Theon staggered back from the prow. Yara's mouth went dry. She had heard stories of monstrous creatures in the deep, but seeing one in the flesh was another matter. Euron had boasted of black sorcery from Valyria. Was this the fruit of his madness? A beast enthralled by that horn's call? Euron's voice boomed across the water, though it was hard to make out the words. Something about the Deep King and blood for the drowned. Yara realized with a sickening jolt that Euron intended to unleash this beast on her fleet, to break them in terror and then annihilate any survivors. But Yara Greyjoy had survived dragons. She would not yield. She shouted to her men, ballista crews, aim for the beast's head or eyes. The rest of you steady. If we panic, we die. The Iron Fleet responded, though fear tinged every motion. Heavy ballistae swiveled, chain bolts locking into place. The serpent reared again, letting out another shrill cry. With a crashing of waves, it lunged forward, smashing one of Yara's galleys with its coiled body. Men toppled into the sea, screaming. The ship's mast splintered, and the hull cracked as the monstrous weight drove it under. Yet Yara had faced impossible odds before. She gestured frantically to the closest ballista ship. Fire, she roared. A volley of barbed bolts streaked through the air, clanging against the serpent's scales. A few buried themselves in softer parts near the beast's neck. It shrieked, writhing in pain, thrashing its tail. The water boiled with foam. Meanwhile, Euron's ships advanced, hurling fire barrels at Yara's flanks. The battle erupted in savage chaos. Galleys rammed each other amidst swirling currents, men leapt aboard in frenzied close combat. Above it all, the sea serpent coiled and lashed, snapping at the rigging, spitting some foul black ichor that burned like acid. Yara watched one of her smaller ships dissolve into a twisted mass of timber. She forced her focus on the beast. If they did not bring it down, Euron's men would pick off the battered survivors. Concentrate fire on the serpent, she shouted, her voice almost lost in the din. Another volley of ballista bolts soared. One found purchase in the creature's left eye, eliciting an ear-splitting shriek. Desperate and savage, the sea raged. Theon led a group of archers who rained flaming arrows on Euron's flagship, trying to disrupt the hornblower. Yara seized the wheel of the Iron Victory, steering closer to the serpent's flank despite the mortal danger. If they could deliver a direct broadside at close range, maybe they could punch through. The serpent lunged at them, jaws wide. Yara glimpsed rows of needle-like fangs dripping with vile fluid. She spun the wheel at the last second, causing the Iron Victory to veer. The serpent's head crashed into the water mere yards away, sending a towering wave over the deck, drenching everyone in icy brine. Fire now! Yara screamed, and the ballista crew obeyed. A spread of chained bolts hammered into the beast's neck and shoulder. One bolt tore deep into muscle, trailing a heavy chain that anchored to the ship's prow. The serpent thrashed, nearly capsizing the Iron Victory. Men scrambled to brace the chain, yelling in terror. The deck pitched wildly, water rushing over the sides. For a moment, it seemed the serpent might drag the entire ship under. Then another galley approached from behind, firing a second volley that hit the beast's flank. With a hideous wail, the serpent released the chain, snapping it with its powerful jaws. Freed, it flailed back, battered and bleeding, smashing yet another of Euron's own ships in its delirium. Yara did not miss the savage irony. Euron could not fully control this monstrosity, only unleash it. Meanwhile, Euron's voice thundered again, blowing that accursed horn. The serpent turned, battered though it was, and reeled toward Yara's position. Yara thought she saw a flicker of intelligence in its wounded eyes, a furious, agonized hatred. It dove beneath the surface, churning the sea with its massive tail, disappearing into the murk. Where? Theon shouted, scouring the waves. The next instant, the serpent's body surged up beneath a neighboring galley, buckling its keel. Men screamed as they were hurled into the water. The serpent's jaws snapped, swallowing a hapless reaver in a single gulp. Yara's heart hammered. She steadied her helm, scanning for Euron's flagship. There, it lurked behind the main melee, hurling fire barrels at any ironborn ship that strayed too close. She could just make out Euron's tall shape at the prow, blowing the horn, summoning the serpent's frenzy. "They're controlling it with that horn," Yara snarled. "If we don't stop Euron, it'll tear us apart." She pressed forward, urging the Iron Victory to cut through the chaotic battle. Flaming debris floated on the surface, half-sunken ships listing to one side. Theon guided archers who rained arrows on Euron's deck, but the distance was still too great to land a killing shot. Euron spotted their approach and signaled his own rowers to pull away. He wasn't going to let them close easily. Suddenly, the serpent reappeared, smashing into the Iron Victory's side. The impact threw Yara against the wheel, knocking the air from her lungs. With splintered, water rushed in through a ragged hole in the hull. The crew scrambled to bail, but the damage was severe. The serpent coiled back, hissing. Theon fired a crossbow at its gaping maw, the bolt embedding in the scaly lip. The creature recoiled, thrashing violently. Its tail whipped around, colliding with Euron's flagship in a spray of water. Yara watched the black-sailed vessel careen sideways, crew shouting. Euron was thrown from the prow, the horn tumbling from his grip. The monstrous blast of noise halted. With the horn's wailing silenced, the serpent seemed confused or enraged. It flailed, letting out a high-pitched keen. Then, like a maddened beast freed from its yoke, it turned on any ship in reach, Ironborn or Euron's pirates. Yara seized the moment. "Abandon the Iron Victory," she shouted. "Board that black-sailed ship. We take Euron now." A flurry of movement ensued. Her crew leapt onto the listing black-sailed vessel, clashing with Euron's men. Theon supported Yara as they vaulted over the rail. The roiling sea threatened to pull them under if they misstepped. The serpent's roars and the crash of waves made everything a nightmare swirl of chaos. On the deck, Euron coughed up water, pushing himself to his feet. His hair dripped, and his face was contorted with pure, murderous rage. "You meddling bitch," he spat at Yara. "I had greatness in my grasp." She advanced, sword raised. "You have only death in your grasp, Euron." They slammed together in a renewed melee. Euron fought like a man possessed, his blade a blur. The deck pitched beneath them as the monstrous serpent's tail lashed at the stern, ripping through the timbers. All around, men battled desperately, ignoring whether their foe was Ironborn or pirate. Some simply leapt overboard in a panic to escape the serpent's wrath. This time, Yara did not fight alone. Theon joined her, brandishing a spear. Euron snarled, parrying Yara's sword and lashing out at Theon. Theon dodged, jabbing the spear at Euron's ribs, but Euron knocked it aside with a brutal strike. Yara slashed at his exposed shoulder. He twisted, taking the blow on his pauldron, sparks flying. Water flooded the deck as the ship took on massive damage, listing dangerously. In the distance, the serpent could be seen coiling around another vessel, dragging it underwater. Smoke and flame danced across the waves. The entire sea had become an arena of carnage. Yara forced Euron back with a flurry of blows. Theon circled around, trying to pin Euron in place. Euron bellowed a curse, hurling a throwing knife at Theon's face. Theon ducked, nearly losing his footing on the slick deck. Yara pressed in, cutting a gash across Euron's thigh. He roared, staggering, eyes wild. "You can't kill me. I am the storm. Io." Yara lunged, plunging her sword into his gut. Blood poured from the wound. Euron gasped, face twisting. Still, he managed to slash at Yara's arm. She jerked away, avoiding the worst of it. Theon thrust his spear, piercing Euron's side. The crow's eye coughed, spitting up blood. Yet he refused to fall. With a surge of defiance, he grabbed Yara's collar, hauling her close, knife in hand. She wrestled his wrist, her own blade still embedded in his belly. The two locked eyes, a swirl of hatred and twisted kinship in Euron's gaze. "Drown God take you," Euron rasped, voice burbling with blood. "I'll see you in the deep." With a final hiss, Yara tore her sword free, then slashed across Euron's throat. He choked, eyes bulging. Theon yanked his spear out, letting Euron collapse to the deck, blood gushing. He spasmed once, then lay still, the watery brine mixing with his lifeblood, which trickled through the timbers into the Black Sea. Yara stumbled back, breathing raggedly. Theon steadied her. Euron's wide, unseeing eyes stared at nothing, a look of shocked rage frozen on his face. Rain and seawater battered them as the stricken vessel lurched. "He's finished," Theon panted, barely believing it. Yara nodded, tears of exhaustion mixing with salt. "Yes," she whispered. Finally, they had no time to savor the victory. The serpent still raged, battering any ships afloat. Euron's hold on it was gone, so it wrought destruction indiscriminately. Yara saw it crush one last pirate galley, then vanish beneath the waves as if retreating to the deep. Whether it died from its wounds or simply fled, no one could say. The ship under their feet was sinking fast. Yara and Theon rushed to gather what men they could. Flames from a drifting fire barrel licked at the deck, and the water poured in from below. Yara glanced once at Euron's corpse, then at the swirling sea. She felt no need for final rites. Let him sink into the darkness he had courted all his life. With the last of their strength, they leapt back onto a half-intact longboat. A few surviving Ironborn followed. They rowed furiously away from the sinking hulk as it broke apart, flames dancing on the water. The serpent was nowhere to be seen, perhaps gone to its lair. The rest of the battlefield was a gruesome sprawl of wreckage, bodies, and drifting debris. A handful of Ironborn galleys remained afloat, battered but upright. Euron's fleet was shattered. The cost was immense, but the threat he posed was ended at last. By sheer endurance, Yara's battered survivors regrouped. They counted the losses, over half of their ships destroyed or heavily damaged, hundreds of men dead. But Euron was slain. The monstrous creature he had summoned was gone. The sun broke through a bank of clouds, illuminating the wreckage with an eerie, golden light. As they navigated the debris field, Theon guided the survivors to salvage any men still clinging to Flotsam. Yara collapsed on the deck of a partially intact galley, letting a wave of nausea roll through her. Her sword arm throbbed, blood trickling from more wounds than she could count. But her mind focused on one fact: Euron's tyranny was done. The letter, the horn, the monstrous illusions, he could not threaten them anymore. When at last they limped back to Pike, the triumphant but grief-stricken cry went up from the docks. "Yara returns!" Bells sounded. People gathered to greet the battered fleet. Yara, half supported by Theon, stepped onto the quay. She offered no grand speech, only a weary nod. The crowd parted, murmuring in awe at the toll the sea demanded. Word soon spread that Euron Greyjoy was slain by Yara's hand. That night, the pyres burned again, honoring the dead who had given their lives to end Euron's menace. Once more, Yara stood on the stony beach, flames dancing in her eyes, the salt wind tugging her hair. Theon stood beside her, silent. As the embers rose into the dark sky, Yara felt something break free in her chest, a release of dread she had carried for years. She had not just defended her realm, she had cleansed a festering wound that threatened all the seas. In the weeks that followed, the realm began to learn of Euron's demise. Ravens flew from Pike, and the battered survivors recounted the monstrous serpent. Daenerys Targaryen's court, wherever it was, likely heard that the Iron Islands had faced abominations from the deep and emerged victorious. Sansa Stark sent a letter of congratulations, praising Yara for her victory and remarking that the North was glad to see one threat removed from the board. And so, Yara Greyjoy stood at the helm of an independent Iron Islands, rid of its most poisonous sun. Storm clouds still lingered in the realm, with Daenerys' aspirations, Lannister intrigues, and the uncertain future of the North. But for the moment, the Iron Islands breathed easier. Yara continued to fortify her domain, to cultivate trade, to ensure no madness took root among her own. She vowed never to let the old ways of unstoppable pillage lure them into destruction. On the battlements of Pike at dusk, she would sometimes recall the memory of Daenerys chained below decks, Drogon captured, and the hush of that impossible triumph. It had birthed all that followed: wars, alliances, betrayals, and at last, a measure of stability. She did not know what the future held, but she knew she had walked through Dragonfire, through a serpent's maw, through the traitorous cunning of kin, and still stood unbroken on the black rocks of her ancestral home. If Daenerys Targaryen ever returned to challenge the Iron Islands, Yara would face her with unflinching resolve, trusting that the bargain struck would hold for as long as the realm had a shred of sense. And if not, if war came anew, she would not shrink from it. She had proven that with cunning, courage, and a willingness to pay the iron price, even the mightiest foes could be brought low. Thus, under a gray sky streaked with the embers of sunset, Yara looked out at the open sea, the wind tangling her hair and carrying the scent of salt. The horizon was vast, filled with hidden perils and opportunities. But the Ironborn had never feared deep waters. They were children of the sea, unbound by the laws of men. And so she squared her shoulders, lifted her gaze, and listened to the eternal crash of waves. For as long as she drew breath, the Iron Islands would remain free, a bastion of independence amid the roiling storms of Westeros. And that, she swore, would be her final legacy. A kingdom of salt and rock that bowed to no one, not even dragons.